Hi, my name is Ophi YouTube Videos. I am a feminist and a lesbian, and I make conversational commentary videos about both of those things, and about three things I am absolutely positive. First, that this video is sponsored by my friends at Valessa. Second, that there is a part of it with more information about a massive giveaway we are doing together. And third, that you should stay tuned for more information or check out my pinned comment. In today's video, as in many times in my life, I would like to talk about Stephenie Meyer's Twilight Saga. We're gonna go on a bit of a journey together today, exploring the way that especially the second to last film bore out the sex-negative, pro-abstinence themes from the books. In other words, we're examining Breaking Dawn Part 1 in particular and its messages through a feminist lens. But this is an Ophi YouTube video, so we're going to be meandering a bit to get there. We will also be talking about female directors, pervasive misogyny, stories about girls and the roles women are allowed to play inside of them, infertility as a feature of monstrousness, and the culmination of a 4-book-long abstinence power struggle into a piece of very big-budget propaganda. I want to begin with a review of Twilight from 2008, if only to say that I know that I am not the first person making many of these arguments, and that I will be far from the last feminist to have thoughts on the Twilight Saga. So I'm reading from Twilight, Sexual Longing in an Abstinence-Only World. If you've been spending time in proximity to teenage girls this week, there's a strong chance you've heard about Edward Cullen. Cullen is the undead hero of best-selling young adult fantasy/romance series The Twilight Saga. He's reached heartthrob status in a major way, and he's done it while refusing to devour, or sleep with, the story's heroine. A Jonas brother for the literary set. What makes the Twilight Saga particularly fascinating and disturbing are the sexual currents that run through its pages. Like American culture itself, Twilight is both lascivious and chaste. Myer, a practicing Mormon, has said she draws a line at premarital sex for her characters, but as Times columnist Gail Collins noted last month, boyfriend Edward holds the line, not heroine and narrator Bella. Bella, after all, is so hot for Edward she tells him she's going to spontaneously combust and frequently forgets to breathe when he kisses her. Meanwhile, he is equally besotted with her, so much so that he trains himself to ignore his thirst for her blood, which has an aroma that could make even a good vampire, Edward and his coven have forsworn munching on humankind, go bad. Yet Edward still won't go all the way because he doesn't want to get carried away and hurt Bella with his superhuman strength. Her physical safety becomes a symbolic substitute for her virginity, and Edward guards it with overprotective zeal. Now that's a real fantasy, a world where young women are free to describe their desires openly and launch themselves at men without shame, while said boyfriends are the sexual gatekeepers. Twilight's sexual flowchart is the inversion of abstinence-only/purity ball culture, where girls are told that they must guard themselves against rabid boys and that they must rein in both their own and their suitors' impulses. But even while inverting the positions, Myer doesn't change the game. Purity is still the goal. Men, or vampires, are still dangerous and threatening, while females are still breakable and fragile. Intercourse still has the potential of resulting in death, just as it once relegated women to a social death. The only difference is the controls are handed over from the teenage girl to the guy, who happens, in this case, to be totally responsible and upright. And I think phrases like purity culture, abstinence, and sex negativity are very useful ones to keep in mind for our discussions here today. Certainly ones that kept coming up in my research for this video, at least. I have pulled from both mainstream and academic articles about these books, and I will speak more about purity culture during a conversation with an ex-Mormon friend of mine toward the end of the video. I don't think I particularly need to spend time breaking down the concept of abstinence, waiting to have sex until you're married, but I did want to slow down to unpack what I'm saying when I reference sex negativity before we get much further. Sex negativity is defined quite simply by the APA, a negative attitude or stance toward any sexual behavior other than procreative marital coitus. Compare sex positivity. And I feel as though the definition for sex positivity is leading me to believe that the opposite is a word that was invented as part of the explanation for sex positivity, but I'm not presenting myself as any sort of expert on these concepts. Maybe sex negativity really did come first. Sex positivity, though, is defined as a positive attitude or stance towards sexual activity between consenting individuals when this is seen as promoting healthy relationships and forms of self-expression. Sex is seen as neither good nor bad per se, and the purpose of sexual relations is not deemed to be confined exclusively to procreation through marital coitus. In other words, you'll tend to hear about sex positivity in feminist circles, not really the ones that the author of the Twilight series runs in. I think the more that we talk about the series, you will understand, if you don't already, what I mean when I say that the Twilight Saga is deeply sex negative. Stephanie Myer believes that sex should happen between a heterosexual married couple and at least once, ideally, result in a baby, even at great personal risk to the mother. I, on the other hand, believe that sex can and should be had by any adult who feels comfortable and enthusiastic about consenting to doing it. And that's a belief that I share with the sponsor of today's video, my good friends at Bellesa. Bellesa is a bi-woman company for all things sexual wellness, and their mission is to empower everyone to embrace, explore, and celebrate their sexuality. Do you know what I think a better solution to an abstinence power struggle is than getting honeymoon pregnant and almost dying about it? Breaking up with your moody vampire boyfriend and going to college alone. Bella could have taken a gap year or traveled or something, and then she probably wouldn't have even missed Edward too badly with a little help from our friends at Bellesa. Like, for example, these new toys. We're not really talking about Twilight for a second, I just need to show these to you. This is the first collection of silent toys. You heard that right. Silent. The big beautiful brains over at Bellesa created what they call Whisper Tech, and it somehow delivered us an assortment of toys in all shapes that hit all the spots in silence. And I'm not kidding about the quiet part. They are all very, very quiet. A whisper, even, you could say. No noise, full power, and they hit all the spots. So, of course, I gotta hook you up, which is why I'm doing a giveaway with Bellesa, so literally everyone wins a free toy. Meet the Whisper Collection, the world's first silent vibrators. Bellesa's new Whisper Tech makes sure that you never need to choose between power and discretion. Before I get into the details, let me show you just how quiet these are. Exactly. You can't hear anything. And it's not because it's weak either. These are powerful, but still somehow completely quiet. I don't get it, but as someone who hates a noisy vibrator, I love it. You can put your pleasure first without waking up the entire house, or even your partner sleeping right next to you, and now in whatever format you prefer. You know and love the Whisper Bullet, the silent bullet vibe with 5 speeds. It is tiny and literally inaudible, but it is so formidable. This thing is very powerful. Then there's the Whisper Rabbits and Whisper Vibe, which both have 6 vibration speeds. 6! Whisper Vibe gives you the quietest G-spot stimulation you'll find, while the Whisper Rabbit has independently adjustable clit and G-spot stimulators in case you want to step it up another notch, but still, in silence. Did I also mention how soft they are? Honestly, this collection is insane, and you have to see it, but not hear it, to believe it. And that's why I'm hooking the Nuance Corner up. Everyone who signs up will win a free Whisper Vibe or a free Rose toy with any Whisper purchase. You can click the link in my description and grab your new vibe. The big question is, they'll stay silent. But can you? Thank you so much to Bellesa for sponsoring today's video. I'm a huge fan of Bellesa. I feel like they are such a natural fit here in the Nuance Corner, and I'm so excited to work together again. Now, let's talk about the sparkly vampire movies. Okay, so I cannot make a Twilight video without acknowledging the huge differences in budget and production from film to film. This is largely a result of the franchise changing hands from movie to movie. The adaptation would begin in the hands of Catherine Hardwicke and with a budget of $37 million, which is a lot of money, but each successive film had more and more and more to play with the Breaking Dawn movies each costing over $100 million. So when we look at these movies comparatively, the first movie is kind of like a quaint little thing by comparison. From a Daily Beast interview with Catherine in 2018, nobody thought this is a big blockbuster franchise. Hardwicke tells the Daily Beast. There were very low expectations for Twilight because every other studio had turned it down. They said, okay, Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants was a very popular book for girls and it made $39 million. That's it. We don't know if this could ever make us any more than that, so we don't really want to spend more than that. The expectations were low literally up to opening weekend. Why do you think I got the job? She laughs now. Why do you think they hired a female director? If they thought it was going to be a big blockbuster, they wouldn't have ever even hired me, because no woman had ever been hired to do something in the blockbuster category. In the interview cited in the Vanity Fair article, Catherine Hardwicke also told the story about how the $37 million budget included $4 million for the rights to the books, something she didn't even know was going to be included in the expenses for the film until it was sprung on her. Even one of the articles that I'm sourcing for from this video calls the first movie an indie in its headline, and I don't think the math exactly works out for that. Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson each reportedly took around $2 million for their roles in the first movie, which I mention both because, I don't think you get paid $2 million to star in an indie movie, and because if we've got $4 million for the rights to the books and then $4 million for our leads, that brings the budget down to about $29 million, and the rest of it probably did go pretty fast. So while it does, in my completely divorced from the movie world opinion, feel like a tiny bit of stolen valor to refer to the first Twilight film fully as an indie movie compared to other actual independent films, I do understand why that argument is made. And I also just do want to give perspective for the fact that for this kind of movie, that budget, as infinitely huge as a number like 37 million sounds to most of us, is not really that huge in the full context. So let me read. From indie to blockbuster, the evolution of the Twilight Saga, from The Independent in 2021. Of the 10 highest grossing films in the United States released in 2008, Twilight, which ranked 8th highest grossing, had the smallest budget, while 8 out of 10 of the highest grossing domestic films had budgets exceeding $100 million. The ultimatum to make Twilight with a limited budget was based on the idea that the film would have little commercial success. Many underestimated the impact that Twilight would eventually have. Though Myers' books were bestsellers, they had a smaller following at the time, prompting multiple hesitant film studios to turn down the project. Nobody knew what it was going to be, what it was. I didn't have committees giving me notes. I wasn't watched by big-time producers. I didn't have the pressure of hitting blockbuster marks, Hardwicke told The Hollywood Reporter. We didn't even have a test screening, so it was really made like an indie film. After the first movie, more people got involved, and the other films were managed to a greater extent. With little studio involvement, Hardwicke created Twilight in a way much different than its sequels, a difference noticeable to fans, casual viewers, and those involved. Actor Robert Pattinson, who plays the 104-year-old teen vampire Edward Cullen, expressed a similar position in his 2012 interview with The Washington Post, when asked which film in the franchise was the most meaningful to him. Definitely the first one. By a huge margin. It was just an entirely different world. For one thing, it was just a really, really fun movie to shoot, said Pattinson. It was difficult and it was crazy, but the experience was so different. Just having a really big, young cast as well. I have never done anything like it since. Everyone was kind of unknown and had a feeling about the movie. There was definitely some excitement there, that it could either be a total miss or something could happen with it. Luckily for fans, something did happen with it. Making $69 million during its opening weekend, Twilight became the top-grossing film directed by a woman with a female protagonist at that time. Even today, excluding animated films such as Jennifer Lee's Frozen films and Brave, Twilight remains as one of the highest-grossing woman-centric films directed by a woman, following only after superhero blockbusters Wonder Woman and Captain Marvel. So that article was written in 2021, and between then and the time of me recording this in April of 2025, there has been a slight shakeup in those all-time box office numbers, largely due to Barbie's release in 2023, directed by Greta Gerwig. A lot of the rest of the other women-directed movies on these box office success lists, I'm finding, seem to be largely from superhero and animated films, as mentioned in that quote read. Also, I did not know Shrek was directed by a woman. That's news to me. Anyway, so far as I can tell, Twilight is now ranked number 10 on the list of highest grossing films directed by women. And yeah, Twilight was a huge success. Catherine Hardwicke has spoken about how they underrated the potential success of the franchise, one quote even being that she was told that her movie might appeal to a few hundred teen girls in Salt Lake City. And yeah, this is a very capitalist feminist critique that I'm making here, where I'm saying that the way that Catherine Hardwicke was treated was unfair. And I do want to acknowledge that there are a lot of worse things even just about the movies themselves. There are far bigger injustices to do with the Twilight franchise than Catherine Hardwicke's career following the first movie, but I do still find this all an interesting note because feminist conversational commentary videos. It's what we're here to do. Twilight went on to surpass all box office expectations, earning the highest ever opening weekend gross at the time for a live-action female-directed film, $192.8 million. But Hardwicke quickly learned that sexist double standards still apply to women who achieve the seemingly impossible. The Monday after her huge opening weekend, Hardwick went into the Summit Company offices to do some online chat room stuff. When I went in, I saw that there were massive bouquets and balloons and bottles of wine and crazy gifts sent to them by all the distributors around the world or whoever, all their friends, she recalls. So I actually had it in my mind, wow, this is a pretty unprecedented success. I had heard these rumors that when a director does something like this, they give them a car or they give them a 2-picture deal or something like that. They give them an office and ask them what they want to do after this. Hardwick pauses. And then I got a mini cupcake that day. I was like, oh, okay, cool. Coming in here, I'm sort of working for free, doing this online stuff, and that's what I was offered, a mini cupcake. Catherine's position always seems to have been that she did not feel like she had time to realize her vision with the tight turnaround demanded by the studio. There is another element to this conversation that actually fits with a lot of what we talk about on this channel. Catherine Hardwick was labeled as difficult. So when she declined to return for the sequel, which she had right of first refusal on the sequel contractually, so she was not fired from the franchise, rumors swirled that she had in fact been let go and that it was her fault. Hardwick figured she could at least use her success to pick up new directing projects she felt passionate about. My agent sent me some neat scripts that I loved, she remembers. One of them was a very intense family drama kind of thing, very gritty. Of course, that's not like Twilight, but it is like 13, which went all the way to the Academy Awards. But they wouldn't even let me have an interview. They would not even meet me. They just flat out said, no, we think a guy is going to direct this movie. So the reality hits you pretty hard, pretty fast. At the time, I didn't understand when people were dinging me for being whatever, emotional or difficult, Hardwick says, referencing a Deadline Hollywood report that quoted sources who called her irrational and unfit to direct the franchise's second film, New Moon. Yet they're praising all the male directors I worked for being passionate and visionary and sticking to their guns, fighting for what they want. But a woman is emotional, difficult, bitchy, whatever. I didn't know those code words, and I didn't know they were used pervasively, and so I just took them personally. She admits the stigma worried her until she realized this is being used all the time for women. She's learned a lot since then, she says. We all have. And I did find a Vanity Fair article from 2008 claiming that Catherine did not like the script for New Moon and that she said that it still needed months of development, but it also said that she was fired. And like I said, Catherine had contractual right of refusal. So this article and any others claiming that she was outright fired at the time were wrong. She was seemingly not valued for her contributions, though, and she did not find much success later on in her career, even though you would think that this movie would have opened her up for that. From 10 years after Twilight, Catherine Hardwick knows she deserved more, from Vanity Fair. Hardwick decided against directing the second Twilight film because it would require too tight of a turnaround. If she had said yes, she barely would have had a chance to breathe after post-production and promotion for the first movie. Twilight came out in November 2008, New Moon hit theaters just 1 year later. The director wasn't initially worried about what would come next for her. After all, she had just turned around an enormous blockbuster on a relatively tight budget, courting a slew of devoted new fans in the process. Offers should have been pouring in. But Hardwick found that she couldn't even get in the room for certain gigs. Instead, she stood by as a craze her film began barreled forward, without her or directors like her. After Twilight's big success, Hardwick notes, there were 4 more Twilights, 3 big screen divergents, 4 Hunger Games, and none of them were directed by women, she said, still incredulous. That was a heartbreak for me. There are other badass women out there that could have done those. It's a problem that goes beyond YA fare, Hardwick pointed out. Hollywood has a tendency to hand projects written by and starring women over to male filmmakers. There's lots of projects like that, she said, running through a laundry list of examples. It goes on and on. There's stories written by women, about women, and given to male directors, over and over and over. I wanted to start with Catherine Hardwick and the first movie, both to set up the series, but also because I think Catherine actually does have a fantastic point she's making about how few of these YA adaptations, or indeed blockbusters in general, are ever directed by women, even and especially when their source material comes from women. And we're gonna have to talk about the woman who wrote the source material for these movies in her own section. This video is not going to be a full franchise deep dive, and though I very much have read the books in the past, I have not reread them specifically for this. But we are going to talk more about Stephenie Myer after I have unpacked some of the major themes in this series and how they wrap up in the final 2 films, but mostly the penultimate one. The first movie in the Twilight franchise is by far the most superior entry in the series. And I won't be doing a full recap, in part because, again, I have not recently reread the books, but also because I am aiming to recreate something like the feeling of being a movie-only watcher in late 2011, remembering some bits and pieces of the prior movies that were kind of weird, and then sitting down to experience everything that happens in Breaking Dawn Part 1. So what I want to do are quick little elevator pitch summaries for each film. This is still inside of the Catherine chapter because it's impossible for me to talk about this series as a whole without still needing to talk about how much better what she did with it was. So the first Twilight movie, the not really indie but kind of indie one, is a blue-filtered, woman-directed classic that looks camp right in the eye. Kristen Stewart plays Bella Swan, a teenage girl who moves to Forks, Washington to finish high school, living with her father there while her mother travels with her minor league baseball playing husband. Bella and her mother will get their own chapter in this video. Don't worry about it. We're gonna circle back around to this part. Taylor Lautner is there as Jacob Black in the first one, and he's going to be a much bigger character in the later movies, but in the first one he mostly serves to deliver the truck that Bella's father buys for her, and then later to deliver lore to Bella about Edward Cullen, her crush at school, who is a vampire. Jacob, a Native American character, actually does not go to school with Bella. He goes to school on the reservation, but he knows about the Cullens because the Native American characters in this series are werewolves. Remember, just a couple minutes ago, I said Catherine Hardwicke's film career is not the biggest injustice about the film adaptations. This is what I meant. I will not be attempting to get around the fact that the Twilight series is actually massively fucking racist. There's an excellent video you should watch about this that I will link in the description and put on screen right now, because I do not think I, as a white woman, need to be the person sitting here and telling you about this. But I also can't, as a white woman, praise the first film and sit here and whine about the later films not being directed by women without also acknowledging that even this movie I teasingly call a camp masterpiece is, at its core, based on a racist and exploitative story. I don't think that the decision to base your werewolf shapeshifters on a real indigenous people is a defensible choice, and the fact that the actual real-life tribe was not compensated, even though Stephenie Myer decided to fictionalize them, is truly nasty. I also want to acknowledge, though, that efforts have been made by the fandom in recent years to attempt to rectify some of this. The Quileute Tribal Council accepts donations directly through PayPal, and they've been raising funds to move their critical facilities to higher ground for the past few years, which is something that I have seen a few pushes in the Twilight fandom to participate in and support. I wouldn't personally call myself part of the Twilight fandom, but I have donated to the Quileute Tribal Council in the past, and I intend on making a habit of donating if and when I talk about Twilight on my YouTube channel. So you can keep an eye on my community tab posts late next month to see how much money we're able to raise to donate from AdSense from this video. But yes, Stephenie Myer and the series being racist is why Jacob has the lore about Edward for Bella. Because he lives on the Quileute Reservation where there are legends about the Cold Ones, the Cullens, the vampire family that Edward is part of. The first movie is almost entirely about Bella and Edward falling in love, despite Edward really super wanting to drink her blood. But then, during the critically acclaimed, at least in my personal circles, vampire baseball scene sent to supermassive black hole, they meet a bad guy. This is the last third of the plot and where the rest of the story really kicks in. The bad guy wants to kill Bella, I think because of her extra special delicious blood, but also just because he enjoys the challenge of her being protected by a bunch of vampires, and that makes him want to kill her. There is a big fight in a ballet studio after Bella is lured there by a fake-out as though her mother has been captured by the bad guy vampire. Her mother, Renee, has not been. It's an old home movie. Stephenie wouldn't have actual stakes like that. All the vampire shit always has to be way outside of the notice of the human characters until Bella decides otherwise, no matter how improbable that is. But this is early enough into the series that you don't really know that that's a pattern yet. The Cullens come to Bella's rescue, but the bad guy vampire has already bitten Bella, and now Edward has to suck the venom out without killing her. We hear Robert Pattinson mumble singing, "Already my all you will." And then he manages to have the self-control to stop and to not suck all of her blood out and kill her, even though she tastes really good. And then Bella goes to the hospital, and her parents are fed a story about how she fell down the stairs in a hotel room. And then Bella and Edward go to prom, and she informs him that she's decided she would like to become a vampire. I'm going to cut back in here if I missed anything that seems really important, but I have watched the first Twilight movie many, many times, way more than any other movie in the franchise. Its glaring flaws aside, it's something of a comfort movie for me, and I know that it is for a lot of other people around my same age too. This is because the first Twilight movie comes as close as any of them do to being good. Because, and I know I'm repeating myself here, but you know I can't pass up a chance to poke fun at Carly not even to dinner with the Kushner's Kloss. They were looking camp right in the eye. Yeah. Reading from The Independent again. The statement blue filter throughout the entire film in Twilight, which is key to establishing the film's tone and encapsulating the Pacific Northwest setting, was not the only thing Hardwick brought to the table. Fans on TikTok and Twitter have also acknowledged what Kirk Honeycutt of The Hollywood Reporter in his 2008 Twilight review called the camp factor. With its visually unique aesthetic, its prolonged stares, awkward interactions, and overblown drama, Twilight represents the definition of camp, an aesthetic that revolves around intentional exaggeration and bad taste as a means to create good art. Hardwick very deliberately intensified an already exorbitant story about sparkling vampires. The most indisputable example of this is within the film's most iconic scene. Those who did not read the books may be surprised to know that the infamous moment where Bella reveals she knows Edward is a vampire did not actually occur in the middle of a forest, but rather in a far more casual car scene. However, Hardwick's stylized portrayal of this pivotal scene was momentous to the film's reception and to showcasing her interpretation of the story. Twilight displays an ironic awareness of its content and plays with audience reception, which the later films lack. The first film of the Twilight franchise appears aware of its own absurdity and played into it, lending itself to the camp interpretation, while the sequels only become more absurd without this ironic self-awareness, crossing the boundary of what can be considered camp into something that just is not critically redeemable. So yeah, there is a significant drop in quality in the following films, despite the greatly increased budgets, big flashy CGI sequences, and special effects. And I agree completely with the author of that piece that it is due to the lack of camp and self-awareness that Catherine seemed to be able to inject into the first movie. Yeah? That's beautiful. I found something I thought was pretty interesting in some of the many articles about Catherine Hardwick that I read for this section of the video. The Observer wrote about Catherine, also in 2018, so I bet we're up for another round of interviews in 2028 when Twilight turns 20. The Observer wrote about much of what we've already discussed. Catherine helming the first movie in the series, declining to make the sequel, and then finding herself unable to benefit from her own success. They talked to sources like Jackson Rathbone, who played Confederate vampire Jasper Cullen, and Stephanie Myer. And it's the Myer quote that I found interesting here. At the time, when they told me she wouldn't direct again, I was shocked, said Myer. Twilight was amazing, and Catherine had created a version that I think appealed to teenagers, perhaps even more than my own. My writing was always a little tongue-in-cheek, but she understood that when you're 16, everything seems that serious. It was difficult for me when they decided to move on from Catherine, Myer added. Although I love Chris Weitz and his work, I felt like she should have been the director for the other films. I realize even more now the significance of having a female director than I did then. I had no idea how small the female director population was. I just knew Twilight was a story that was written by a girl, about a girl, and should be told by a girl. I'm just very interested in how those two women got on. Something else that came up in the many interviews I read with Catherine Hardwick is that she and Stephanie butted heads over Hardwick's desire to cast the film as more diverse, with Myer insisting that she had written the characters with glistening white skin. And I guess I had read that as Stephanie maybe being less enthusiastic about the first movie overall, but it sounds as though actually she just wasn't around for much of the production of the first movie because she was still busy with Breaking Dawn. And that's another thing that I think is worth mentioning when we talk about the first movie. Yes, it is the first movie in a franchise that will end with the movie we're discussing today and the one that comes after it. And now all of them are out, and all of them came out in pretty quick succession. But Breaking Dawn, the book, was not published until August of 2008. So nobody working on this movie that came out in November of that same year knew where things were headed at the time. Some of the things that happen in book 4 are so wild, I have to imagine there was at least some kind of reaction from some of the people who had signed on to these movies once they learned about, like, the Renesmee imprinting thing. So that plot I mentioned that takes place in the back third of the movie does end up mattering again in the later movies. The bad guy was actually with 2 other people, and we'll get one more returning in each sequel, but they're all out of the way by the time we get to Breaking Dawn Part 1. And James, Victoria, and Laurent all exist mostly just as a way to have some outside stakes and some danger to Bella, more than like as a genuine theme of the series. I could be wrong. Maybe somebody else has a more intelligent interpretation of these antagonists than I do, but I believe that all three of them are there pretty much just to be bad guys, and that's fine. The things that I would say are the major themes of the series, especially the movies, are things like, I mean, okay, it's a vampire romance, so vampirism and immortality are obviously going to be a major theme, but that's also kind of easy. The other main themes that I would throw out would be just like dramatic teen love and abstinence and self-control. And self-control could just be part of abstinence, but no, no, no. Remember, Edward had to suck the venom out of her wrist and stop himself in time. So it is both abstinence and self-control, or really it's the self-control to be abstinent. Even in the campy and woman-directed first film, this focus on abstinence does exist. Sure, as Catherine defended to the Daily Beast in an interview, she didn't know where everything was going at the time, but she did include, say, this scene where they make out in Bella's bed and then Edward throws himself away from her and back against the wall because he's afraid of being out of control and hurting her. Not afraid enough of being out of control and hurting her to leave her alone or not like sneak into her room at night and watch her while she sleeps, but enough for big tension moments about how much they cannot have sex. A nearly shocking amount of the Twilight series is preoccupied with how much Bella Swan would really, really like to have sex with Edward Cullen, but they cannot do that. And you probably already know exactly why this is, because you cared enough to click on a however long this video is length video about Twilight, but we are going to save that for the Stephenie Myer chapter and continue to just talk about the fact of this being a theme in her series. Twilight, set in Forks, Washington, was published in 2005, the year the Bush administration spent $270 million on abstinence-only sex education programs. Edward, as the heroic protector, is mirrored in abstinence-only textbooks like Choosing the Best, which presents a story of a princess who cheekily dispenses advice to a knight about how to kill a dragon. The proud knight is ashamed to accept her help, and he marries someone else. The moral is that if you're too sassy and independent, you won't find a husband. The Twilight series echoes an assumption of abstinence education that sex can be deadly before marriage, except in the Twilight stories, the danger is vampire venom rather than an STD. And the idea of a resplendent hero who cares about your virtue bolsters cultural campaigns like True Love Waits and virginity pledges. However, studies like one by sociologists Peter S. Behrman and Hannah Bruckner have shown that of adolescents who took virginity pledges, only 12% kept their promise. Others engaged in oral sex, and they were 1/3 less likely to use protection when they did eventually have sexual intercourse. Even in the actual Forks High School, though Washington State requires comprehensive sex education, a poster prominently displayed in a girl's bathroom reads, "Kiss a toad and he's still a toad. Abstinence till marriage." Like the Twilight franchise, the abstinence movement succeeds because it is what Dagmar Herzog calls a self-help and self-improvement movement that holds out the promise of perfection. Abstinence enthusiasts vow that it translates to a perfect marriage with a perfect man with whom you will have perfectly fantastic and always heterosexual sex. This idea is part of the abstinence movement's campaign to make chastity sexy. I would say that abstinence is a bigger theme in Twilight than the love triangle is. There is a love triangle, yes. Jacob Black also has a crush on Bella, which yikes at how that resolves, but we're not there yet. And any actual tension about who Bella is going to end up with is pretty much over with by the end of the second movie. Jacob and Bella do still kiss and stuff in the third movie, but it sucks. One of the kisses is non-consensual. Bella breaks her hand punching Jacob about it, and then her cop dad is happy that Jacob kissed her because he also hates Edward Cullen, so much that he thinks it's awesome for his daughter to be assaulted. Because Stephenie Myer was telling a story about a girl, or however she put it, which I don't even disagree with her about. Twilight very much is about a girl, but I think that that comes with a few more implications than I think she really thinks of when she says that. Stephenie also said this about male versus female directors in that Observer interview. After becoming one of the most successful authors in the world, Myer turned her attention to Fickle Fish Films, her production company, with her business partner Megan Hibbett. I've been in a lot of rooms and we've tried to get some female stories made into film versions because movies reached wider audiences, Myer said. The pushback on getting a female director, the pushback on trying to get some female leads. They find a guy who's done 2 commercials and they say, go with him, he can get you more money. We are raised considering the male perspective our entire lives, she continued, and men don't understand our stories because they can go their whole lives avoiding them. I'm also just cutting in to say that while we will have plenty of criticism for Stephenie Meyer later, I do want to mention that this doesn't seem to be entirely empty words on her part. Yes, she and I have very different ideas about what is empowering to women. We could probably argue about feminism for a few days straight, but she does seem to have at least tried to give opportunities to female directors in the future. In 2014, after the original run of the films was finished, Stephenie Meyer posted this on her author website.
Hi, friends! On Wednesday, I, along with Lionsgate, Women in Film, Facebook, and Tongle, announced an exciting new project: the storytellers, new creative voices of the Twilight Saga. Or, if you're following the hashtags on social media, hashtag Twilight Stories for short. We are teaming up to find 5 aspiring female filmmakers to create short films based on a broad spectrum of characters from the Twilight universe. We're excited to have Twilight fans participate in a variety of ways. I'm looking forward to finding out which characters you're most interested in. If you want to refresh your memories on their stories, they're located in the Twilight Official Guide. Which do you think are the most cinematic? One thrilling part of the project is the amazing group of ladies teaming with me to mentor these aspiring filmmakers. Actress Kristen Stewart, Academy Award winners Kate Winslet and Octavia Spencer, Jennifer Lee, the award-winning writer and one of the directors of Disney's global blockbuster Frozen, Twilight director Catherine Hardwicke, Emmy Award-winning actress Julie Bowen, and Women in Film president Kathy Schulman. All of these women have dedicated their careers to getting female voices on the big and small screen. It's something that I care about passionately, and it's truly a great honor to be able to participate in a project that will help discover new female voices. There will be much more, and I look forward to sharing all the details of how you can be involved in the coming days ahead. I'll be sharing most of the updates through Fickle Fish Films, my production company, website, and social media accounts, so make sure you're following if you don't want to miss anything.
I don't know, I just wanted to mention this here because, like, it's not nothing. Maybe taken in conjunction with the pro-life propaganda and everything else, it's also not much, but it's not nothing. Part 2. Breaking Dawn Part 1 is a horror movie. Okay, so I was 10 when the first Twilight movie came out in 2008. I, like many people with shitty childhoods, was a voracious reader, and my sisters were not. They didn't really enjoy reading, but they did very much enjoy the Twilight books, and I ended up reading them at some point before the New Moon movie came out, definitely before I was technically a teenager, but I was already reading YA, and I was very intrigued by something that could make my non-reader sisters actually enjoy a book. I ended up also becoming very absorbed in the books when I first read them. So that means that I ended up seeing New Moon and Eclipse in theaters with my sisters when they came out, but Breaking Dawn Part 1 came out close enough to the holidays that we were told we ought to wait and go see it on Christmas Eve together as a family. So my sisters and I were like, uh, surely the movie can't be as much about how having sex will kill Bella as the book was, right? And then we ended up sitting down to watch Breaking Dawn Part 1 together as a family on Christmas Eve. I have to imagine there were many such cases, if not specifically for a special trip to the movie theater for the holidays, just the experience of, going with your daughter for the second to last movie in the franchise she's invested in, and then experiencing Breaking Dawn Part 1 for the first time, just completely fresh. Like, you have no idea where anything is going after the wedding that's been being hyped in the first couple of movies. I talked in one of my recent Hunger Games videos about wondering what it would be like to experience Catching Fire without having read those books, but I truly cannot imagine what it would be like to experience Breaking Dawn Part 1 without having read the books and knowing intimately where we were going. But where are we going? Because while it would be maybe an odd choice in a YA adaptation franchise if it weren't for where it's headed, I'm not against the concept of sex scenes being in movies. Like, this isn't me sitting here doing weird morality code discourse. It's fine that there are sex scenes in the later Twilight movies. It's more like the messages that the sex scenes are the culmination of, messages that I was not equipped to see for what it was as a child. Which is that, yeah, Breaking Dawn Part 1 is a horror movie. It is so scary. Holy shit, it's so scary. But it's more than just a scary movie about how terrifying the concept of pregnancy is. It is a piece of propaganda, and for something that I think is actually even more insidious than just abstinence and purity culture, which you could argue the first three movies are also propaganda for. If you watched my video about the Hunger Games epilogue, you already know where we're headed with this, because I haven't been sure how the media analysis videos we're going to go over on this channel, so I temperature checked for interest, and a lot of you said yes. Thank you. But it is very clear to me as a 26-year-old woman, in a way that it was not as a 13-year-old girl, that Breaking Dawn Part 1, and I guess therefore by extension the entire rest of the Twilight series, is a piece of pro-forced birth propaganda. So, to the best of my ability, I am going to examine Breaking Dawn Part 1, directed by Bill Condon, as its own entity. We all know already that it's based on the Stephenie Myer novel. We all know already that I am waiting to speak about the Mormonism in her chapter after this one. But this movie did exist as just a movie, just as much as it did as an adaptation. Many people saw the movie, and only the movie, and the studio was likely micromanaging all the sequels to make sure that they did make sense, even if you hadn't read the books. Breaking Dawn Part 1 came out in 2011, and it was, at the time, the best performing movie in the Twilight series. This record would be broken again with the final film in the series, but every other movie, besides Eclipse, made a pretty noticeable increase in profit from the one before it. Movie reviews from the time also seem to focus more on what I remember being so struck by at the time, the sex of it all. The New York Times review from 2011, titled "Edward, You May Now Bite the Bride," reads,
Dawn isn't the only thing that gets broken in the Twilight Saga Breaking Dawn Part 1, the latest and best of the movies about a girl, her vampire, and their impossible, ridiculously appealing, yes, I surrendered, love story. Marked by a canny mix of violence and chastity, the franchise has always had plenty of broken heads to go along with its pure thoughts. But here it also features a marital bed reduced to kindling after a rough night. If that doesn't sound like the series that has kept millions of prepubescent viewers virtuously rapt, you're right. But little Bella's all grown up now, and while Edward is still more zomboid than juicily predatory, this time, not everything else on the screen is dead too. With only 4 books in Stephenie Meyer's chart-busting series, as opposed to 7 Harry Potters, the people behind the Twilight movies can be forgiven for stretching out the screen experience for as long as possible. Breaking Dawn 2 hits next November. And after all, so much does happen in this movie, which takes the arc of human experience, birth and death and everything in between, and works it up into a rich, sudsy lather.
I don't know. That review is just so weird. I just needed to share it with you. I'm sorry. Thank you, Trash Discourse, for reading that really, really weird review for me. This is another one I thought was really weird. I also found this 1-star review from The Guardian that immediately jumped into a Brokeback Mountain joke. This was a big thing at the time. I mean, not using Brokeback Mountain as shorthand for I'm about to be homophobic, but you should laugh about it, because that was also a big thing at the time. But the one I mean is joking around about Edward and Jacob running off together instead. That was like a big thing at the time, and the review very much plays into that.
Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. Just when we thought the Brokeback style drama of Jacob and Edward couldn't get any more intense, they decide to have a child together, with Bella as the surrogate. This new ultra-emotional episode of the Twilight drama turned some twihards into twisofts at the screening I attended, and the person next to me was openly sniffling. So was I, for different reasons. The ongoing emo operetta of this drama now sweeps us away on a new riptide of mawkish euphoria. The deal is that Edward and Bella, played by, of course, Robert Pattinson and Kristen Stewart, have decided to get married. It's happening. It's on. And so at first glance, the agonized abstinence debate would finally appear to be over. Bella has made her decision. She will go into the bridal ceremony as the most obviously sacrificial victim since Diana Spencer in 1981.
This is before she played Princess Diana in a movie. He was just making a weird, bad Princess Diana joke for no reason. But continuing.
The wedding reaches a fever pitch of romance when Jacob, Taylor Lautner, shows up secretly at the ceremony, and he and Edward have one of their burning-eyed confrontations on the subject of Bella's well-being. But the bride and groom head off happily enough for their honeymoon in what appears to be a luxury hotel bungalow near Rio. Then incredibly, the angstiness continues. The couple appear not to have considered the matters of condoms and birth control. Soon Bella is pregnant with a baby girl, and inevitably this brings Jacob and Edward closer together. Bella sweetly says she'll mix their moms' names to call her Renesmee. But Jacob Word is the real story here. Jacob Word gets more and more stressy as the demi-vampire inside Bella grows at an alarming rate. Bella gets thin and gaunt, her poor little limbs like matchsticks. She makes Mia, Farrah, and Rosemary's Baby look like Popeye after a spinach brunch. And the wolf pack decide this vampire child is an intolerable future threat. Sort of like when their ancestors cast out Mowgli from the pack because Shere Khan had arrived in their part of the jungle. And they know a man-child would attract danger.
I don't know. I wanted to use these two really weird reviews as a way to move through some of the criticisms of Twilight that I think are at least more strangely phrased and less justified than a lot of the other ones that have been coming up and will come up in this video. Like, okay, also, do you remember how weird everyone was about Taylor Lautner, who was like 19? 19 when Breaking Dawn Part 1 came out, so put 4 years off of that for Twilight. They were really weird. I will remind you with the help of Trash Discourse again.
Crucially, and as important, Mr. Condon, whose earlier films include Dreamgirls and Gods and Monsters, can also offer up, and without suggestion of filmmaker embarrassment, the sight of Mr. Lautner ripping off his shirt, as Jacob, Edward's long-suffering, oft-rejected rival for Bella's affection. Mr. Lautner has plenty of a reason to strip angry. He can turn into a wolf, for starters. And Jacob's musculature has long been one of the most special of the movie's effects. That's reason enough for Mr. Condon to get the character's shirt off, as is the unavoidable truth that Mr. Lautner, whose pumped physique and flat affect bring to mind one of those friendly pizza delivery boys in a pornographic movie, remains a dish best served with as few words and clothes as possible. God, we get it. We're all horny for werewolves. Can you just be normal about it?
It's just so weird and blatant and it's always been something that I have felt so strangely about. It's one of the things that kind of came up in my mind when I was saying there are other injustices other than Catherine Hardwicke about the Twilight franchise. I just feel weirdly about the way that Taylor Lautner was sexualized. Because the thing is, yeah, he was 19 in Breaking Dawn Part 1, but he had been younger than that in the other movies. Like, he was a teenager. He was a teenager when he became famous and when it started to become cool and funny to lust after him and compare him to an actor in an adult film. I don't know. It's just weird. But again, like, these are not feminist critiques of Twilight. And most mainstream critiques of Twilight, I feel pretty comfortable saying, were not feminist critiques. It's not to say nobody was doing think pieces about Twilight's failings as a feminist narrative, even prior to the big forced pregnancy in the last film. They certainly were. But arguments like that existed mostly in feminist spaces. And when the rest of the world was criticizing Twilight, and they did, they were doing it along the same lines as the way that it was being underrated and downplayed when Catherine Hardwicke was at its helm. See? I had a point bringing her up earlier. Time spent learning is never wasted. Twilight as a series merits a lot of criticism, and specifically a lot of feminist criticism, but a lot of the most commonly voiced criticisms at the time of its height in popularity were that teenage girls liked it. This is why, toward the beginning of what's now known as the Twilight Renaissance, when people revisited these books and their prior love for them, there was such an impulse to say, no, they were good, actually, and that all of the criticisms truly did just come down to hating something for being loved by women. I don't think that's the case, though. Not because of reasons like the racism and the dehumanization, and also for the other reasons we're talking about here today. I think a lot of people who hate Twilight have very, very good reasons to hate it, and though I wouldn't say I love Twilight, I do think that there are good reasons that people who love it have for enjoying it. But that conversation belongs in Stephanie's chapter, so I am putting a pin in it for now. I want to keep talking about Breaking Dawn Part 1. Alright, so as mentioned in the reviews we've been reading, the plot of Breaking Dawn Part 1 is that Bella and Edward get married, go away on their honeymoon, and then Bella gets immediately pregnant. And I'm not being cute when I call the pregnancy scenes horrific. They are genuinely played like body horror, with Bella realizing she's pregnant and having her stomach already growing visibly, like nearly immediately. Not for the sake of storytelling alone, but because the baby who she has been impregnated with is a half vampire, half human hybrid who ages at a rapid pace and therefore gestates much more quickly than 9 months. And all of that on its own, especially with where we're about to head with it, is enough, but I still want to zoom back just a little bit. The first few movies did have a repeated theme, so repeated that it comes up even in reviews dating all the way back to 2008 of abstinence, waiting for marriage, not having sex. The main characters then get married and have sex, which is portrayed as violent enough to break the bed and also leave big bruises on Bella, but that she really enjoyed and tries to convince Edward to do more of. I know I said I'm trying not to talk about the books too much, but honestly, the movie did show more than I would have expected to of this, of Bella wanting to have more sex and Edward saying no. I guess they had to show it though, since they had Jacob yelling at her wedding about how Edward would screw her to death. And while Bella does not immediately die from having sex, yeah, she does a few weeks later. It's genuinely don't have sex because you will get pregnant and die, except that the dying for the pregnancy is a good thing, framed as Bella's big choice. Remember, I said there were also feminist critiques happening at the time. I'm going to read from one of them now. This is from Ms. Magazine in 2011. But another narrative thread in Stephenie Meyer's Twilight Saga that is problematic from a feminist perspective, the latent anti-abortion message, is heightened, not diminished, in the film. While some argue that the book is pro-choice as Bella chooses to carry out her pregnancy, the way Bella's pregnancy is depicted and discussed, along with the strong pro-abstinence messages of the saga, the religious underpinnings, and the motherhood is the natural and happy ending for all females tone, result in a narrative that leans far more toward the anti-abortion stance. When Bella discovers she is pregnant, 14 days after her wedding to Edward, he is horrified, telling her that Carlisle will get that thing out. Bella responds, "That thing?" seemingly distraught at his choice of words. This attention to language continues in further scenes when the psychic vampire Alice repeatedly uses the word fetus and is corrected each time by her vampire sister Rosalie. "Say the word! Baby! It's just a little baby!" Given that the film ultimately depicts the pregnancy and resulting birth as miraculous, the word baby is framed as more apt than the more pro-choice preferred fetus. The term miracle and Bella's instant transformation into a woman who will protect her pregnancy at all costs, even her own life, also echo common anti-abortion narratives. Two things strike me about Breaking Dawn Part 1, having rewatched it for this video. One, holy god, that movie is so long and for no reason. We spend an entire half hour before we even leave their wedding. A whole half hour. You sit and watch Bella and Edward get married for half an hour, and then there's another 10 minutes or so of the trip to get to the honeymoon, the travel to get there before they get to having sex. I think they did not need to split this into two movies. I think this could all have just been the first half hour or so of Breaking Dawn, and they could have put it all out at once, but of course, there would be much less money to be made that way, and thus 5 movies for 4 books. But the second thing that struck me about Breaking Dawn Part 1 is that I think it would be almost difficult to write a story with more to say about maternity and motherhood and gender roles and the expectations of women than the one that they came out with Breaking Dawn Part 1. In big things like the final scenes, but also in small things that I know that I am overanalyzing, but that I am literally here to overanalyze. We will talk more in just a little bit about the constant repression of Bella's sexuality by Edward, but I've never watched Breaking Dawn Part 1 without feeling deeply and genuinely sad for Bella in the scene where she puts on fancy underwear to try to entice her new husband and he straight up laughs at her. I think that is sad. I also find it interesting that they don't adjust their plans for turning Bella into a vampire once they realize they're incompatible this way with her humanity. They don't talk about what they could do when they're going to change their plans They don't talk about what to do, if they want to change her sooner, if she would like to be changed on her honeymoon so that they can continue to have sex. Once they realize that penetrative sex is something that might not be safe, though it's portrayed much less violently in the movie than in the book, it becomes once again just an opportunity for Edward to be in control, to lord their sexuality over her head once again, even though she was promised that now that they're married, they would be equals in this. Bella has a sex dream about Edward, and she cries because she so badly wanted it to be real. And yeah, sure, that's an expression of some extreme horniness, but also of a loneliness that I think got really exasperated by being denied intimacy with her partner and laughed at for wanting more of it. And I just have to say, there are other things Edward could have been doing if he was so worried about hurting her by fucking her to death. He should have just packed some toys. He could have just used his hands. He knows how to be adequately gentle when kissing. He could use his mouth in other ways. But he won't, because the only sex that mattered to him and to the narrative was the kind that he could withhold, the kind that would impregnate her, and then, once he did impregnate her, she felt an intimacy with that monster fetus kicking in her womb. It seems to be the first chance of closeness that Bella had to anyone in however long her honeymoon with Edward was. So while I do still think that it's weird and out of character compared to other books for her to suddenly value this fetus so much more than this immortal, eternal life with Edward that she's wanted so badly, I can also understand why she might have grown attached to it as her sudden only real option for companionship while she's isolated like that. The same reason she and Rosalie become friends suddenly once there's a fetus she wants Rosalie's help protecting. Also, I knew it was coming. I've already even talked about it in this video, but man, every time they scold about fetus versus baby, I jump scared a little bit. Like, it feels like you stopped watching a blockbuster movie and started watching something on Great American Family or PureFlix instead. It's just a baby. Just say the word. It's just a little baby. Edward, Jacob, Alice, Carlisle, and the Quileute Wolves are all against Bella's choice to carry out the pregnancy, and understandably so, given she looks like a living skeleton. The fetus, as Carlisle tells her, isn't compatible with your body. It's too strong, too fast growing. Yet, Bella never considers not carrying out the pregnancy, even though her life is clearly at risk. Something that would no doubt make those who propose egg as person laws and let women die acts quite happy. The life of the fetus is framed as more important than Bella's, a sentiment that colors these pieces of anti-abortion legislation. And Bella is portrayed as a heroic martyr, the ultimate mother-to-be, rather than as a delusional love-struck teen with a seeming death wish. I think I otherwise very much could go along with a feminist reinterpretation of Twilight, were it not how Breaking Dawn plays out and how completely abortion is out of the question, despite Bella previously never intending on having children. I don't think that a feminist interpretation would redeem some of the more foundational issues with Myer's writing, but I do think that there could be potential for some kind of mitigation were it not for all of the rest of everything else about Twilight. Because foundationally, those first three movies are teen romance movies where the driving motivation that the protagonist has is her desire for immortality, right? I mean, yes, she does want that immortality so that she can continue to be Edward's girlfriend / wife forever, but that is still a big choice and she is making it. She wants to be immortal. She wants to be a vampire like Edward. But then Stephenie Meyer kind of plays a trick on you. Stephenie Meyer has to play a little bit of a trick on you when she's writing this book in order to try to make it make any sense whatsoever that Bella's driving motivation and goals have shifted so completely from be immortal with Edward to die in childbirth and maybe his baby will survive. And the trick that Stephenie Meyer plays is by turning the rest of the cast, other than Rosalie, into antagonists for Bella so that Bella has the chance to make a choice and be stubborn about it. Another reason why it's so impossible to sell me on this choice Bella makes is the amount of the pregnancy that we spend outside of her head. So that is a book criticism more than a movie one, but I'm still mentioning it here. I've not given nearly enough to understand how Bella's perspective on having children could change so much. And listen, I've made it clear in my hour-and-a-half long Hunger Games epilogue analysis video that I do believe characters who said they don't want children can change their minds about that. I just don't understand how Bella changed hers. I guess I just needed more than what is provided in Breaking Dawn to explain to me how and why Bella's mind changed and why she's suddenly so willing to die in pregnancy and or childbirth. And I don't think anything that's been provided to me gives me a better answer than because this tells us a lot about the author's worldview. That review continues. Bella is duly punished in pregnancy and childbirth, bringing to mind Genesis 3:16, "I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you." Yet, the closing birth scene is more sanitized than depicted in the books. Yes, Bella's spine is broken, but there are no crunching bones, no sound of the vampire-human hybrid gnawing its way out of the womb, no vomiting of blood. Instead, Bella lays prone and skeletal, looking like a very bruised, very pregnant, very dead Snow White, as Edward, vampire charming, bites her neck, arms, and legs in hopes of turning her into a vampire before she dies. The happy ending is the birth of Renesmee, whom Rosalie, depicted in the books as having a ruined life because she cannot have children, happily swaddles and kisses. If you know the saga, you know that Bella does not die, another message that her choice to carry out the pregnancy was the right one. While it's true she makes this choice, the book and film never suggest any other choice, leaving us with an anti-abortion message seductively packaged as a true love fairy tale. Bella is cast as a modern Snow White, whose body, shriveled and bruised like a rotting apple, is able to bloom once again, thanks not only to Edward's life-saving bites, but to Renesmee's birth. Yeah, Breaking Dawn Part 1 is Bella keeps the baby and she dies in childbirth, but then she turns into a vampire. We see her eyes open and they're red because she's immortal now like she wanted. That's it. There's some more plot in the second and final movie when the book goes back to Bella's point of view, but like for the purposes of our discussion and for the purposes of people who just went to go see this one movie in 2011, that was it. The movie was about how it would be really, really horrible if Bella's vampire family-in-law made her abort the fetus, and how it's a good thing she didn't do that because now she's a beautiful vampire mommy. And actually, obviously I am not yet done talking about this movie or its implications, but that and the mentions of Rosalie in the most recent quote read feel to me like a perfect time to move into Chapter 3, Vampire Mommy Issues. Now's the chapter I mentioned earlier where we would be discussing Bella's relationship with her mother. Not only is Bella never portrayed as having any interest in motherhood or children, but if anything, I would have thought that the relationship with her mother, as portrayed, might have soured her a little on the idea. Basically, Bella is presented to us as if she spent a good chunk of her childhood growing up with Renee being parentified, the one responsible for making sure bills were paid on time and for so many other things in the day-to-day life of the mother she described as harebrained and erratic that she is genuinely concerned for her mother's well-being without her when she moves in with her father, while she's still in high school. And the cop dad, for that matter, is also portrayed actually as similarly borderline incompetent, apparently unable to cook for himself at home and constantly eating out at a diner if Bella isn't the one cooking for him. And I do suppose that the argument could be made that, again, to reference Hunger Games discourse, similarly to Katniss Everdeen, Bella's parentification is meant to be a theme that sets her up to be a parent later on. But by showing us this only in the context of Bella not being cared for by her mother the way she should have been, and without scenes and scenes and scenes of her being kind to and protective towards vulnerable children like we got in Katniss's case, it does nothing for me to set Bella Swan up as anything other than a neglected child. Bella's mother, Renee, though, is not understood by the narrative, at least not in the first book, to have been neglectful in a way that is more harmful than quirky, I don't think. Renee is pretty much characterized as good-natured and well-meaning, but clueless. So clueless that she will stay that way even after Bella has a child. Charlie learns about Renesmee and not the entire truth of Bella's transformation. He's mostly left in the dark, but he gets let in on some of it because Jacob transforms into a werewolf in front of him and he learns there's more going on. Renee, though, just stays in the dark, despite Renesmee being saddled with such an awful name in her honor. From my memory, in the books, there are a few moments where Bella regrets that she won't be able to have a relationship with her mother after she turns into a vampire. So you could argue that this was all being set up already, and what I am pointing to as a weird and disappointing feature of the books was meant to be an entirely different narrative altogether. That Bella mothering her mother meant she always wanted children, even though she never said so. She does clearly love her mother. She named the baby after her and Esme both. But I just can't remember her ever sitting around longing for children with Edward prior to the sudden pregnancy. I don't remember that being part of her plan at all. Bella actually had plans of going away to college, and she ended up unable to do that because she decided to keep the fetus. And, that's a more realistic parallel to anything that happens in real life to young teen mothers than what if your vampire family-in-law wanted to make you kill your baby, which is not a real issue pregnant people face in the real world, really. There are, of course, also other, I think pretty well-known already arguments to be made about the way the women in the Twilight series are treated, specifically around maternal issues and their characterization there. Just to speed run here. We have Esme, Carlisle's wife and Edward's vampire mom, and Esme's backstory is that... Okay, this one's even worse than I had remembered. Esme's backstory is that she saw Carlisle Cullen when she was 12, and he treated her for a broken leg, and she fell in love with him then, but then she got married to an abusive man when she grew up. She got pregnant, lost the baby shortly after he was born, and then attempted to die by suicide about it. Carlisle saw her again, recognized her, and turned her into a vampire, taking away the autonomy she had tried to express, as is a huge theme with these vampires, and casting her into his little father-son life with Edward in order to be Edward's mother figure. And similarly to Bella suddenly being very okay with dying as long as her monster baby might survive, we aren't given enough in this narrative to assume that Stephenie Meyer sees any reason that Esme would be unhappy with this lot. Personally, I see a lot here that a more interesting character would probably be pissed about, but this is Twilight. And in Twilight, only bad women get pissed about their circumstances. The first of the two women I feel like the narrative sorts as bad women is, of course, Rosalie Cullen. As has already come up in this video, Rosalie is something of an antagonist to Bella in every movie, leading up to the one where there is a fetus cooking in Bella's belly. Rosalie is jealous of Bella because Bella is a human, and Rosalie, who hates being a vampire, does not understand why Bella wants immortality so badly. And this could be interesting, maybe in somebody else's hands, but it's really not that interesting in the books or the movies. Even though Rosalie herself could be a pretty interesting character, she is not well liked by the narrative. But, there are some really fucked up things about Rosalie in ways that just... I don't think that the narrative understands how fucked up they are. Carlisle didn't just do a one and done shopping for a wife for somebody in his family, himself or otherwise, from women who were laying there dying with Esme. He found Rosalie laying dying after she had been assaulted by her fiancé and his friends. He saw her and he thought that it would be a waste because she was so beautiful if he let her die. And also, there's an implication that it's because he thought that she might be a good match for Edward. So he turned her into a vampire and brought her home for him, but then they weren't a match. Edward doesn't like blondes or vain women or whatever. So then Rosalie later ended up saving her husband Emmett from being attacked by a bear, and she made Carlisle turn him into a vampire to be with her. Emmett doesn't seem to have much big complicated thoughts about his immortality or really anything, but Rosalie maintains her angst, and her angst in particular is over not being able to grow old with and have babies and grandbabies with Emmett. There is something so deeply sinister about how baby snatchy Rosalie is. I don't think it's meant to be sinister, though. I think it's meant to be a good and nice thing, the way everybody loves Bella's baby so much once she's born, and a good and nice thing that Rosalie, who has been an antagonist thus far, is on Bella's side before the baby's born. But Rosalie would let her sister-in-law die just so she could possibly get to steal that niece or nephew if it survived. And we should also bear in mind that none of them even know if it's possible for this fetus to survive or to do anything but kill Bella, or if it will grow past being a baby or anything. It's all very typical pro-forced birth shit where just the theoretical concept of this half-vampire baby is way more important than its mother. And it's also, I think, an interesting tell into the way that Stephenie Meyer writes women. This is from an academic article titled Wife, Mother, Vampire, the Female Role in the Twilight Series that I'm going to be reading from a lot in the rest of this video.
Modern society's fascination with the ideal of female beauty is what Woolf terms the Iron Maiden. Woolf defines the Iron Maiden as the modern hallucination in which women are trapped or trap themselves, that is, rigid, cruel, and euphemistically painted. Contemporary culture directs attention to imagery of the Iron Maiden, while censoring real women's faces and bodies. The Iron Maiden produces a beauty backlash that is spread and reinforced by the cycles of self-hatred, provoked in women by the advertisements photo features, and beauty copy in the glossaries of magazines. While Bella does not have magazines to compare herself to, she does have the vampire beauty, which she compares to the airbrushed pages of a fashion magazine. As a result, Bella has a self-hatred for her human body, which she views as so clumsy that it makes her almost disabled. Just as the Iron Maiden traps women in an ideal of perfect inhuman beauty, so too does being a vampire trap women in a perfect, inhumanly beautiful body. While the vampire body is perfect, the body comes at a price, a lack of choice. As Rosalie tells Bella, once it's done, it can't be undone, meaning that once Bella is turned into a vampire, she can never go back to being human. Rosalie emphasizes the importance of this to Bella in telling her own past as a human. While Bella thinks that becoming a vampire means a happy ending, Rosalie has a different view, saying that if we had happy endings, we'd all be under gravestones now. Being a vampire does not imply a happy ending to Rosalie, but rather being human implies happiness. To be human is to have a choice in life, whereas being a vampire means being entrapped in an eternal body and yet without eternal possibilities. Rosalie is trapped in the body of a vampire, the ideal beauty. As such, she is trapped in the vampire version of the Iron Maiden, an ideal of perfect beauty. The real problem is our lack of choice, Wolf writes. Similarly, the real problem with being a vampire is the lack of choice as well. While vampires have an eternity ahead of them, it is not a true life marked with experiences and aging. Rather, it is a monotonous life that restricts individuals to limited roles. The high school student, the doctor, the housewife. Rosalie is the most appropriate character to advise Bella regarding the seriousness of being a vampire. Rosalie is the incarnation of pure beauty, the most beautiful Cullen. Even as a human, Rosalie was blessed with a beautiful appearance. She explains, I was thrilled to be me, to be Rosalie Hale. Pleased that men's eyes watched me everywhere I went. From the year I turned 12. Delighted that my girlfriend sighed with envy when they touched my hair. While beauty was important to Rosalie as a human, so too was something else. She explains, I yearned for my own little baby. I wanted my own house and a husband who would kiss me when he got home from work. While Myer's emphasis on Rosalie as an example of the beauty myth in the male gaze might seem like a critique of misogynist practices, Myer ultimately recedes into a conservative view of women's roles and Rosalie's desire for the traditional female roles of wife and mother. Rosalie blames her being a vampire on beauty. Carlisle turned Rosalie into a vampire, saying that it was too much waste. I couldn't leave her. To let Rosalie die would have been a waste of beauty of value. Rosalie feels vampire beauty is a curse, a vampire version of the Iron Maiden. Here, the maiden traps Rosalie into a beautiful body, making her conform to a life she did not choose. She would trade everything to be Bella, to be normal instead of the most beautiful thing she's ever seen. Rosalie's conversation with Bella, highlighting the severe implications of becoming a vampire and achieving the beauty ideal, serves as a warning in the novels that beauty comes with a steep price, a lack of choice. Rosalie's background highlights Wolf's main argument that society's message is that a woman should live hungry, die young, and leave a pretty corpse. Wolf says that the problem with cosmetics is our lack of choice. The problem with cosmetics exists only when women feel invisible or inadequate without them. This argument is illustrated in Rosalie's warning to Bella that the problem with being a vampire is the lack of choice in lifestyle. While Rosalie's warning is important in stressing a feminist argument, Bella unfortunately feels that not being a vampire would make her feel the way women without cosmetics can feel, invisible or inadequate. Bella choosing to become a vampire reveals Myer's feminist stance as hollow and conservative. Bella tells Edward that it just seems logical. A man and woman have to be somewhat equal, as in one of them can't always be swooping in and saving the other one. They have to save each other equally. I can't always be Lois Lane. I want to be Superman too. Bella feels that staying human implies a type of inequality or inadequacy, since she is powerless. She remains Lois Lane while Edward, with all his vampire powers, gets to be Superman. Bella, however, does not end up as Superman in the end, but rather a domesticated female vampire in her role as wife and mother. She marries Edward and soon afterwards becomes pregnant with a half-human, half-vampire baby. Only after Bella gives birth to the baby and thus solidifies her domestic role does Edward turn her into a vampire.
And Leah Clearwater would be so offended that she's in a chapter titled Vampire Mommy Issues, but I'm bringing her up here anyway. She's not a vampire, she's a werewolf, but oh no! Since this is clearly the saddest thing Stephenie Meyer thinks can happen to a woman, Leah Clearwater is infertile. She can't have children. That's so sad. We'd better spend a bunch of time on the page about how she's so sad about that, since Jacob can read her mind. There certainly isn't anything more interesting we could be doing with this one single girl werewolf that exists in apparently the entire lore of this universe. It's all about how she can't have kids. Remember when they did that little, oh no, Black Widow is so sad she can't have kids, she thinks that makes her a monster thing in Age of Ultron? That doesn't feel like it would be out of place in the Twilight universe at all. The only thing is that they might have found a way to make Natasha get pregnant with Hulk's baby after all, or something, if it were in Stephanie's hands. I am reading from another academic paper here. This one is called Monstrosizing Infertility, Supernatural Barren Females in the Twilight series by Stephanie Myer. I thought it was an interesting way to talk about Leah, who is certainly, again, because of being the only girl werewolf, she's treated very poorly on the basis of both like her gender and also kind of her gender presentation, or the fact that being a werewolf at all is gender non-conforming. You'll see what I mean, I think, from this excerpt. Breaking the tribal paternal order and the taboo of female sexuality, Leah overflows traditionally delineated cultural and social boundaries, and thus represents the in-between, the ambiguous, the composite. Challenging the binary classification of male and female, she demonstrates a lack of stable and unambiguous gender identity, which is, as many scholars argue, the very essence of the construction of monstrosity. Leah's punishment for her transgressions, unwilling as they are, is her barrenness. Her fate is shared by the other female transgressors, vampire women. The denial of their right to approach any form of biological motherhood is reinforced by the very conceptualization of immortal children as taboo punishable by death and by the disastrous consequences of females creating new vampires, like in the case of Victoria and Maria, as well as by inability of some to do so, like in the case of Rosalie and Emmett. Renesmee, Edward and Bella's daughter, seems to be the only exception from this rule. According to the imprinting theory, as the subject of a wolf's imprinting, she has to be fertile. However, this exception can be explained by the fact that Renesmee is half human from her mother's side, as Bella gave birth to her before becoming a vampire, and thus she is endowed with human femininity. By constructing the supernatural female protagonist as infertile, the Twilight series casts fertility as the defining feature of human womanhood. This notion is easily discernible in Rosalie identifying the loss of her humanity with the loss of her reproductive capacities, and reaffirmed by Leah and Esme. The former hopes to regain her fertility along with full humanity upon the termination of her shape-shifting abilities. The latter has ended her human life upon the loss of her child. Remarkably, the notions of race and class are just as irrelevant within this discourse as the notion of species. Rosalie, an upper-class white vampire, and Leah, a Native American shapeshifter, most likely coming from a humble background, are connected over the social, racial, and economic boundaries as sterile, monstrous females. In spite of them being, quote, natural enemies, end quote, and hostile towards each other, there is a certain unanticipated understanding and connection between the two women as far as children are concerned. I totally get her perspective, admits Leah while talking to Jacob about Rosalie's attitude to Bella's life-threatening pregnancy. I'd probably do the same as the bloodsucker. Thus, childlessness is depicted as an undesired state and a sorrow for all women, regardless of their origin or social position. Curiously, the notion of male reproductive problems is conspicuously absent from the series. Even though none of the childless male protagonists show any indication of longing for an offspring, they are still able to produce it. Nothing in the Twilight narrative suggests that the fertility of male shapeshifters might have been impaired by the activation of their tribal wolf gene. In fact, the whole construction of the imprinting theory implies the opposite. Similarly, as it ultimately appears in the last volume of the series, the reproductive capacities of the male vampires also remain unharmed. They are seemingly even more potent than regular males, able to impregnate human women, that is, beings of a different species. In consequence, the childlessness of vampire couples proves to be entirely the female vampire's fault. As a result, the impossibility to produce offspring sets supernatural women apart not only from human women, but also from supernatural men, placing infertility as the central attribute of monstrous femininity in Twilight. And I think this is obvious, but that being something that some scholars define monstrosity as obviously does not mean that's how we feel here in the nuance corner about people who are gender nonconforming or do not have a clear identity of gender or any such thing. This is about the way that the character is being treated in the universe and the way that she's being responded to by her author, right? We got that? Do you want a video where we analyze all the lady characters in Twilight and what kind of roles they're allowed to play? Let me know. I'm on the fence about whether or not talking about Twilight is just a one-off, so let me know. Homestretch. Part 4. A story about a girl written by a girl. All right, let's start adding Stephanie herself back into this discourse. Twilight, famously, came from Stephenie Meyer's subconscious first. She wrote the first book in 3 months, basing it on a dream she had about Bella and Edward in a meadow, having a conversation about how badly Edward's desire to drink Bella's blood complicated the fact that they were in love. I do think that Twilight starting as a dream is relevant. I think that the amount of these things that are sort of subconscious for Stephenie Meyer are relevant. When I say that Twilight is a piece of pro-forced birth propaganda, it's not because I think that Stephenie Meyer was sitting there twirling her hair around her fingers trying to figure out how to pressure young people into going through with a pregnancy, even at great risk to their health. I don't think it's that sinister. And I actually, rare thing for me to say, but I actually do agree with Stephenie Meyer when she will sometimes defend her books and say that she clearly never expected anyone in them to be a role model because it's a vampire romance book. I also anticipate that most of you who clicked on this video have already seen ContraPoints' seminal work on the topic, but I do agree with Natalie ContraPoints that people moralizing around romance novels as if they are meant to portray role models, whether or not they were written that way, is as old as romance novels themselves. As Natalie and many other feminist thinkers have pointed out academically and in my comment section whenever we talk about Colleen Hoover, it has long been a thing to accuse women of reading the wrong books. People tend to moralize about that, especially in ways that paint their concern for the well-being of the women in question reading it as a perfectly acceptable reason to exert control and condescension over women. And I do think that that's all true. And like I said earlier, there's lots of criticism of Twilight that's misogynistic and gross and that I didn't want to read. Like I had people read me some of those weird reviews for you, but I stayed away from the things that are very clearly just hating something for women liking it. But there is nuance to this. So I do want to get into some of that nuance, and it's why I haven't really been focusing too much on how terribly abusive the relationship between Bella and Edward as portrayed is. I think Natalie ContraPoints does a really good job talking about romance novels and desire and tropes and the ways that things in fiction are not necessarily always what we actually would want to have happen in real life. Again, you should watch that video. You likely, statistically, you probably already have. And in the interest of nuance, I do want to allow the idea that Bella Swan is not written to be a role model, and that we can disregard for a moment that her relationship with Edward is troubling on many levels. I want to make an argument that Bella Swan serves not as a role model, but as a self-insert. A lot of people have already said as much, sometimes pointing to things as shallow as a comparison of Bella's described features versus Stephanie's, sometimes pointing to the actual contents of the series. I'm, of course, way more interested in the latter. Because remember when I said people who love Twilight had good reasons to love Twilight? That, in part, I think, is because it's not actually just Stephenie Meyer who Bella is a self-insert for. It's nothing as shallow as the author and the character both being pale brunettes, but the self-insert part is kind of a structural feature of the books, in my opinion. Bella Swan is, again, other than in the question of whether or not she would like to have sex with Edward and or become immortal, usually a fairly passive character, and the few traits she does have are not ones that make her hard for a young audience to project themselves onto. Once again, I don't think this is like an intentional thing that Stephenie Meyer did, right? No hair twirling. I don't think that she did this in order to make her book more relatable, but consider that one of Bella's main personality traits is being a book reader, and you're kind of going to get close to what my conclusion is here. A lot of the young women who are reading for fun will be endeared by a main character who also reads for fun, and a lot of them also probably had read Wuthering Heights and enjoyed seeing Bella do that too, which then in turn makes it easier to imagine yourself as her. Described as average and given very few actual negative personality traits, I would say the other major character trait given for Bella is that she's clumsy, which I think kind of serves as a relatability thing more than anything. And for the main character in a romance novel to be a self-insert or a route in for the audience is normal, both in published work and online. Think like Wattpad things, where the object of the love interest's affection is simply YN for your name. The appeal of Bella Swan or your name isn't to be a role model, someone to base your future and your real-world actions on. It's to be a vehicle for wish fulfillment. And Twilight as wish fulfillment I find no less interesting to examine based on its messages and themes than Twilight as didactic tale. So yeah, I agree with Stephenie Meyer when she decries being expected to have written characters who only ever behaved as paragons of morality, but I do think it's also really interesting what she did and did not write even within that. She doesn't want them to have to be paragons of morality, but she's certainly not going to write premarital sex or hand stuff. And it's interesting, I think. It's interesting what the fantasy of Twilight is. The fantasy of Twilight is to be special. Bella Swan is so, so special. She's the new girl in town, the sheriff's daughter. The boys at school all have crushes on her, and the girls are jealous, but make real efforts to include her immediately into a big friend group. Bella dodges multiple invitations to dances from boys she's not interested in, has a vampire and a werewolf to choose between, even if there isn't much deliberation between those two choices, but they're both devoted to her, even if, in Jacob's case, it was because he was devoted to her future baby. Bella is so, so special that bad guys want to kill her, and that her blood smells extra good, and that Edward Cullen wants her, and that he loves her, and that he cares about her enough to take on a deeply controlling role in her life. I'm incapable of thinking about Twilight without thinking about the time that a friend of mine tried to read it for the first time as an adult. They got to a point in the first book where Edward mentions to Bella that even if she did try to leave, Edward could simply bring her back to the car. And my friend said, so functionally, every decision Bella makes after this is a response to a hostage situation, right? And I think that's true. I've seen arguments that this is better later on in the series, that after Edward returns following his absence in New Moon, he's less controlling, but it is very true that, like, he makes the point of the difference in their physical strength over and over and over again. I would need to reread the books in order to be able to track it better if he's worse in the first book than the later ones, but I do think that there are still significant losses to Bella's autonomy throughout all 4 books. Like, when Bella wants to go to the reservation to see Jacob and she finds a piece of her engine missing. Edward has tampered with her vehicle, with her means to escape to somewhere that the Cullens are obligated not to go because of a treaty. That's fucked up. And I'm inclined to see Bella's vehicles as a symbol of her autonomy as well. Edward completely replaces her truck later on. She is gifted a before car and an after car, as in before and after turning into a vampire. The first one being a fictionalized missile-proof Mercedes Guardian, bequeathed to her by her betrothed before their wedding, and the latter being a Ferrari, since all the vampires like to drive fast and in ostentatious cars. Other than, like, I don't understand why Edward's is a Volvo then, but, like, I feel like I have no gauge on how fancy a Volvo is. I don't know shit about cars. I don't even drive. Anyway, though, the influence of the patriarchy on the Twilight series is very, very clear in Bella's subservience to both Edward's whims and physical power, but also in other elements. Carlisle Cullen is without any doubt the head of the household and the patriarch. Esme is there as his resurrected wife, happy to raise however many vampire teenagers he brings home and shoulder all of their angst as they repeat high school over and over again and act the way Edward acts. Even in Breaking Dawn Part 1, the specific phrasing when Edward is telling Bella about the time that he was going out and killing people, he said he rebelled against Carlisle. I feel like rebellion against the patriarch, like, it is so clear to me. And there's like a tension between Bella both wanting to disobey but also ultimately obeying Charlie, right? Charlie Swan, though his protectiveness over Bella makes sense when you remember things like him being told she simply fell down some stairs in a hotel and that's how her body returned so broken when she disappeared after some fight on a date with her new boyfriend. Charlie is a deeply, deeply patriarchal figure nonetheless. We see him loading a shotgun in the first movie before meeting Edward, and his distrust of the vampire is worsened, I think, again, reasonably, after he sees his daughter left near comatose with grief after being left and broken up with. But Charlie loses me in that his protectiveness over his daughter is not one in favor of her own autonomy, but in favor of her making the choice that he would like her to make. Charlie wants Bella to be with Jacob, and he wants that so badly that he's pleased when his daughter is kissed without her consent by Jacob. Even with Charlie's rational dislike of Edward, though, it's still important that he get Charlie's blessing for the marriage. And then Charlie walks Bella down the aisle, literally giving her away to Edward. And just him walking her down the aisle and literally giving her away takes like 5 whole minutes in the movie. I don't even think I'm exaggerating. There's a tension here that I think gives away a lot of the foundational flaws in Twilight. It wants the conflict of Charlie rightfully despising Edward, but it fears what it would actually mean for Bella to be so openly disobedient to her father, or to rebel against him. Sure, she runs away in the first book, and sure, she continues to see Edward, even though her father would clearly prefer she didn't, but it's framed as a good and sweet and meaningful thing that this marriage would be approved by both of their families. But what if Charlie had refused to give his permission? What would Edward have done in that case if he couldn't have had the exact antiquated norms he wanted for his wedding? Was Charlie's permission before the ceremony and blessing as important as waiting until marriage for sex was, or was that one that he was more flexible on? There are individual moments of agency that Bella Swan exhibits throughout the series, like going to the ballet studio when she thinks her mother is in danger and getting rescued by the Cullens there, but many of them are actually acts of self-harm in service of her love for Edward Cullen. When I say that, I'm thinking of the cliff diving and thrill-seeking in New Moon so that she could see a hallucination of him chiding and attempting to exert control over her, or during the big battle scene in Eclipse with the last of the third interchangeable bad guy vampires from the first movie, drawing her own blood to distract the bad guys so that the others could kill her. And, of course, in Breaking Dawn Part 1, as we have mentioned, opting to risk dying in pregnancy and or childbirth despite very valid protests from those around her, including Edward, in just the hopes of the survival of a baby that she fantasizes will look only like Edward with no interference from her. And I think these moments of autonomy for Bella are interesting, both because I know that Stephanie points to them and says, essentially, look, Bella did do something. Stephanie Myer is very offended by implications that her story is sexist, and she's gone so far as to write an entire gender-swapped version of the first book, just to prove that Bella's relative weakness is a result not of being a girl, but of not being a vampire. And in some cases, yeah, that does work. Bella is a human teenager. She's not as physically strong as the vampire. It does make sense that a vampire girl would need to save a human boy from being hit by a skidding van just as much as the reverse. But, I mean, it's also pretty telling, isn't it, that Renesmee can't exist in the gender-swapped version, and so it just ends after only one book? Maybe I should read gender-swapped Twilight? Let me know if you want me to do that. I'm not going to do that unless a bunch of people ask me to. This is part of why I found that quote I read from Stephanie Myer earlier interesting, when she was saying how easily men can avoid the perspective of women. I don't think she's wrong about that, but I think the series is also a good case study for which perspectives Stephanie herself is able to imagine things from and how limited they are. Twilight is a self-insert patriarchy power fantasy. It is a story where your options are informed, limited, and controlled by men, but that you enjoy it, because the most controlling of those men is your preferred partner. He then reins in your impulses, allows you to express desire for him, but carefully, zealously protects your virginity, giving you the ability to feel horny, but nothing to need to repent for afterwards. I do think Edward's paternalistic control and repression of Bella's sexual desires are a part of this fantasy. Edward's withholding of physical intimacy, as well as what material conditions are met before he rewards her with it, are a very interesting thing to study in this series. This is from Wife, Mother, Vampire again. Bella's blood further contributes to the sensuality of the novels, because her blood manifests itself as a scent, which in return brings Edward physically closer to Bella by arousing his senses. Bella often says how she can feel his nose sliding along my jaw, inhaling, to which Edward responds, just because I'm resisting the wine doesn't mean I can't appreciate the bouquet. You have a very floral smell, like lavender or freesia. It's mouth-watering. Edward's explanation that he is resisting the wine not only means he is resisting the desire to drink her blood, but also to express his sexual desire. Edward tells Bella that, on the one hand, there is the hunger, the thirst, that deplorable creature that I am, I feel for you, but there are other hungers. Among the other hungers he is referring to is his sexual attraction to Bella. He resists giving in to his sexual desire because to give in to his desire would mean a loss of control of his need. He has such a need to be in control of himself that he and Bella have a standard of careful non-contact, where they are careful not to get too physically passionate. This caution can be seen in their first kiss, as Bella describes, his cold marble lips pressed very softly against mine. Blood boiled under my skin, burned in my lips. My breath came in a wild gasp. My fingers knotted in his hair, clutching him to me. My lips parted as I breathed in his heady scent. Immediately, I felt him turn to unresponsive stone beneath my lips. His hands gently, but with irresistible force, pushed my face back. He laughed aloud. I'm stronger than I thought. It's nice to know. I wish I could say the same. I'm sorry. I kept my eyes on him, watched as the excitement in them faded and gentled. Bella's reference to her blood as it boils under her skin and burns in her lips, a vaginal symbol, alludes to her sexual desire. Bella's use of wild conveys her passion as raw and untamed. Edward's response, turning to unresponsive stone, cools Bella's desire and defers the sexual moment. Bella notes this by saying that she watched as the excitement faded and gentled. Edward and Bella's sexual desire is restrained. For Edward, this restraint illustrates his self-control, whereas for Bella, it represses her sexuality. Myer's Twilight series is reflective of what Betty Friedan terms the feminine mystique. In the feminine mystique, Friedan states that under the feminine mystique, women can find fulfillment only in sexual passivity, male domination, and nurturing maternal love, and that a woman can know fulfillment only at the moment of giving birth to a child. In the feminine mystique, there is no other way for a woman to dream of creation or of the future. There is no way she can even dream about herself except as her children's mother, her husband's wife. Although Friedan's work was initially published in 1963, the arguments Friedan notes in her novel are very much prevalent in Myer's Twilight series, a series published over 40 years after the feminine mystique. Friedan's very definition of the mystique, with the focus on women finding fulfillment only through sexual passivity, male domination, and nurturing maternal love, is the model Myer employs for Edward and Bella's relationship. Bella states in the first novel how she and Edward have a standard of non-contact so that Edward does not suffer a loss of control of his needs, reinforcing the mystique's model of sexual passivity and male domination. The passage describing their first kiss further illustrates the mystique's messages, as Bella describes Edward's cold marble lips, a description connotating authority. Bella describes her reaction as one that is not passive by using such phrases as blood boiled under my skin, burned in my lips, breath came in a wild gasp, and fingers knotted in his hair, clutching him to me. Her reaction is not passive, but passionate. As a result, it undercuts Edward's male domination. Edward is forced to reassert his male domination and turns to unresponsive stone beneath Bella's lips. His hands gently but with irresistible force pushed Bella's face back. The use of the words cold, marble, stone, and force associated with Edward signify him as the domineering figure in the relationship, while the words associated with Bella, softly and gently, connotate a fragile nature, reinforcing Bella as the passive, controlled figure who Edward must be in control of and take care of. After Bella becomes a vampire, Bella's desire is further controlled. This is evident in Bella and Edward's kiss after Bella has become a vampire. He took my face between his hands and leaned his face to mine, slow enough to remind me to be careful. He kissed me, soft as a whisper at first, and then suddenly stronger, fiercer. I tried to remember to be gentle with him, but it was hard work to remember anything in the onslaught of sensation, hard to hold on to any coherent thoughts. It was like he'd never kissed me, like this was our first kiss. And, in truth, he'd never kissed me this way before. It almost made me feel guilty. Surely I was in breach of the contract. I couldn't be allowed to have this, too. Though I didn't need oxygen, my breathing sped, raced as fast as it had when I was burning. This was a different kind of fire. How different this kissing was. I read his expression as I compared the indistinct human memories to this clear, intense feeling. He looked a little smug. "You've been holding out on me," I accused in my singing voice, my eyes narrowing a tiny bit. He laughed, radiant with relief that it was all over. The fear, the pain, the uncertainties, the waiting, all of it behind us now. "It was sort of necessary at the time," he reminded me. "Now it's your turn not to break me." The above scene depicting Bella and Edward's first kiss after Bella is turned into a vampire parallels that of Bella and Edward's first kiss in the series. In both, Edward cools Bella's desire. In Twilight, Edward's response of turning to unresponsive stone cools Bella's desire and represses her sexuality. In Breaking Dawn, Edward's comment that "now it's your turn not to break me" is authoritative, implying that while Bella can express her desire, she needs to take caution. Bella also feels a sense of guilt. In Twilight, she apologizes for her outburst of desire. In Breaking Dawn, she says, "It almost made me feel guilty. Surely I was in breach of the contract. I couldn't be allowed to have this too." Her thoughts in Breaking Dawn illustrate her sense of guilt over expressing her desire, as well as illustrating the controlled nature of Edward and Bella's relationship with the use of words like contract and "I couldn't be allowed to have this too." Bella's statement that "I couldn't be allowed to have this too" further demonstrates that she does not feel self-worth. She feels she is not worthy of expressing her desire, as well as not worthy of Edward's attention. Yet the two scenes differ as Edward displays more physical intimacy in the Breaking Dawn passage, as noted by Bella's use of the words stronger, fiercer, and sensation to describe the moment, a contrast to their first kiss in Twilight, where Edward is associated with such words as cold marble lips and unresponsive stone, connotating a void of being displayed passion. This change in Edward's demonstrations of affection are due to Bella being granted the gift of vampirism after cementing her role as wife and mother, fulfilling the norm of the feminine mystique. Because of the fulfillment of the mystique, Bella also illustrates another of Frieden's arguments that for the woman who lives according to the feminine mystique, there is no road to achievement or status or identity except the sexual one, the achievement of sexual conquest, status as a desirable object, identity as a sexually successful wife and mother. In Breaking Dawn, Bella's identity becomes that of a wife and mother. After she becomes a vampire, her identity becomes that of a sexually successful wife and mother, one Edward no longer feels the pain, the uncertainties, the waiting of being with. And I know I only gestured at being unhappy with the narrator swap during the pregnancy earlier, but I was really, really satisfied with the way that that particular gripe of mine was addressed in this piece as well. So I want to read that for you too. While Bella provides the narrative voice for much of the series, Myer breaks Bella's first-person narration to switch to Jacob as narrator when Bella finds out she is pregnant. Myer returns Bella to the role of narrator after Renesmee is born. Only after Bella becomes a mother is her narrative voice returned. This narrative change is reminiscent of Frieden's discussion when she states, "The end of the road, in an almost literal sense, is the disappearance of the heroine altogether, as a separate self and subject of her own story. The end of the road is togetherness, where the woman has no independent self. She exists only for and through her children." Bella's pregnancy signals the end of the road for her, her disappearance as a separate identity. Other than the traditional female norm of wife and mother, Bella is no longer a separate self. As a result, Jacob takes over as narrator in order to continue the story, while Bella transitions into the togetherness associated with motherhood. Bella is able to regain a narrative voice after she gives birth because she is now speaking to readers from her role as mother, and the story's focus shifts from her to Renesmee. I really enjoyed reading this paper. It is linked in the description. It's 14 pages long. I've shared a lot, but not all of it with you. It's just really, really good. Highly recommend. I'm so sad you can't see how much body glitter I'm wearing, by the way. Like, I've started to hit pan on this, and I feel like it barely even shows up on the webcam. But this is part 5, the Mormon elephant in the room. Despite the length of this video, I know I have left many stones unturned and only kind of pushed at a few of them. There are more conversations to be had about the role of beauty in Twilight. Bella is allowed to covet it and delight in it when she is bestowed it in her role as a sexually successful wife and mother, while also being modest and fighting with Alice's attempts to beautify her so that she can be spared from the contempt the narrative has for vain women. Wouldn't a more interesting story to Bella's loathing for her humanity and her lack of beauty to be for vampires not to have reflections? I'm not arguing that they need to not sparkle in the sun. I'm not arguing that they should die in the sunlight. I'm just saying, them not having reflections would be more interesting for this. For Bella to be granted a beautiful stranger to embody, but to have no image of herself other than the one that she remembers and hated as a human for being so painfully average. But that would be too complicated of a fate for Bella. Bella's fate is very uncomplicated in a way that people raised in certain high control religions are very encouraged to imagine uncomplicated fates, in the way that the feminine mystique gets to pretend to be uncomplicated. What I want to do for the rest of our time together, instead of talking about that, though, is to speak a bit more to the Mormon element of it all that I have been pushing off for this whole video. And I thought that a fun way to do that would be to have a conversation with a friend of mine who knows far more about that side of all of this than I do. So here's that.
Yeah, my name is Kaia Ball. I use they and them pronouns. My blue sky is Kaia Ball Writes. And I have a website, kaia-ball.com. So that's where you can go find me. I am a poet, essayist, and I have a blog about soup you can find if you dig a little. So I was raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the LDS Church, colloquially known as the Mormon Church. There's a lot of Mormon churches. There's a lot of Mormon sects, but there's not a lot of Mormon sects. But there's a lot of Mormon sects sects. And yeah, we love that one. So I'm what's known as an ex-Mo, ex-Mormon, ex-LDS, however you want to slice it. I left something like 8 years ago.
Yeah, so as you already know, because I gave you a little bit of time to prepare for this, I asked for the list of the top 5 Mormon things about Twilight. And I also made a list of 5. Do you wanna do yours first, or do you want to hear mine first?
Yes, I literally lost my list, but it's always brewing in the top of my hating heart. So I can do it again extemporaneously at any moment. Um,
Perfect.
do we, I feel like this is the clunkiest way, but also the funnest way. Do we both want to say our number ones? I kind of want to hear what your number one is.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's fun.
Okay. What do you
Okay,
think? What is your number one? What do you think is the most Mormon part of Twilight?
so my number one on my top 5 Mormon things about Twilight list is everyone is young, white, and beautiful.
Okay, you're pretty close. I put the obnoxious racism. The obnoxious racism is
Yeah.
the most Mormon thing. The anti-native racism is the Mormon Church gets its name from the Book of Mormon, and the Book of Mormon is one of the most racist things you can ever encounter. And the Mormon Church hands it out for free. I would love to hear what you know about that young white beautiful racism. Because we could spend, I mean, people have spent writing books and books and books about it. So, have you ever heard the thing? I think I texted you about this once about Mormon Bigfoot.
I think you texted me about it, but I'm not sure if you explained it, and I feel like you should explain for the audience either way.
Yes. Okay, so I don't know if I'll be able to, like, I don't know if citations exist for this. This is very like Mormon pop culture. But there is a concept in the Mormon church. This is in the Book of Mormon that this is Mormon belief. This is not anything I hold in my heart. This is Mormon belief that Native American people, and specifically people of color, exist because of a curse. You might have heard curse of Cain in evangelical churches, right? So there is this concept that Bigfoot is Cain, like someone who, like specifically Cain, the murderer who was left to wander the earth, because there's also Mormon concepts of like other people of color who have been like forced to like walk the earth and who've experienced this like curse of darkness. Whereas white people who have been given this blessing of like sparkling whiteness, like white delightsomeness. Joseph Smith was not a gifted author. White delightsomeness is like this blessing white people have. And yeah, so Mormons, like, depending on the pop culture, depending on like the generation, believe in Bigfoot and think that he is an indigenous man.
A
It
lot.
goes deep.
Yeah.
So when
Yeah,
you
I
think
mean,
about the PNW and like the deep, deep roots of like the subliminal messaging of what you feel about like looking down on groups that live there, it runs deep.
yeah, I think that actually does for me help, like, because it always like I feel like before I understood a little bit more about the context of like, oh, Stephanie Meyer is a deeply Mormon woman writing a deeply Mormon series. I was always kind of like, how did she even get to this? How was she even like, oh, and then I'm going to pick this real life tribe of real people and I'm going to characterize them as animals and monsters. And I do think that that makes it make a little bit more sense to me.
I think it's Mormon culture, because Mormonism very much is a culture, to pick somebody at random and like write fan fiction about them. That is the basis of the Book of Mormon. That is what Joseph Smith, this very lauded figure, did to write his Book of Mormon. And then that became the Mormon pop culture going forward, is to like retroactively make everything in history about Mormonism. The Book of Mormon includes like references to ancient Egypt. There's like pictures of ancient Egypt in there, and it's like this is why ancient Egypt actually supports Mormonism. Like that is how Mormon pop culture works. is you are retroactively like making fanfic theories about why everything supports what Mormonism is today.
That makes so much sense, but then you're like blowing my mind.
It really sets you up to be like the perfect conspiracy theorist, the perfect like QAnon person, and it's like a really good fantasy sci-fi author. You think about like Orson Scott Card, you think about Brandon Mull, you think about Battlestar Galactica, you think about Brandon Sanderson. It sets you up to like be really good at crafting these like wide fantasy worlds. Like Mormons are renowned fantasy and sci-fi authors because we have like these really sprawling like canons that we grow up with.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. That's really cool, actually. Like it's not cool when what it results in is like heinous racism, but like it's cool to be able to see the connection between those things.
This is the part where I wanted to make sure I said before, but I reserve the right, as I do with any conversation with Mormonism, to take a break or just like straight up end this partway through because it is very easy to get triggered on these topics, just so you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Um, my point number two was a little bit less serious. So I put the like the big one on number one, and then the rest of these kind of just bounce around.
That's part of why I'm like, let me see what Opie has.
My number two most Mormon thing about Twilight is I remember Bella being very descriptive about like she would drink a Coke and she would act like it was like getting her high.
I'm like, should I put him on blast? One time. So this is a common thing adults in the Mormon church around me would do. One time my dad had those like alcoholic chocolates at Christmas and thought he got drunk. This is like a common thing adults would say is that they would get like they'd like accidentally eat some sort of like Irish cream something on an airplane and be like, and I got so sick. Like it's like something psychologically to them where they fully believe it. And Mormon teenagers will do it at parties. Like they'll drink like punch, and they think the thing about punch in movies that makes punch punchy is that it's in a bowl. Like that is such a Mormon thing. So Mormon. Absolutely.
Thank you. I feel so validated.
It's real. It's tangible. I've seen it and I hate to admit it. I've lived it. I've lived to survive it.
And my third and fourth are like kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
But I had for point number three the purity culture, and then point number four was specifically the indecent khaki skirt.
I knew the khaki skirt was going to come up, and I'm so happy to hear it. Purity culture was kind of my number two. I wrote Edward's reticence because I feel like that's such a thematic arc and can be something. I find it really striking when someone's background is baked into a story, right? Which is why I think if you're not from a certain background and it's like, but I can research writing a story, it's like, no, I really want diverse voices at the table because your background informs the messages and the themes you write. Edward's reticence forms the spine of like this novel, and the way he's like, no, I have these urges and I'm not going to act on them. No, you smell so fucking bad. Like his desire and his pull, and the way he's like, we need to wait till marriage, we need to go at this pace. He is a returned missionary. I'm not sure how much that term will mean to people who aren't familiar with the Mormon church, but like there is a very specific timing. There is a specific timeline where Mormon men are often older than Mormon women when marriage happens, because Mormon men more traditionally go on missions, which to go like proselytize, than Mormon women. Mormon women are allowed to, but it's less common and it's not mandatory. So there is like that age difference very common. The men are more likely to like set the rules and tones and traditions for their relationship, where the women are more likely to be like, we should get married, we should start a family. They're more likely to like push for it to exist, while the men are more likely to set the tone. Like all of that dynamic is informed by Brigham Young University culture, like BYU culture. It's informed by Mormon culture. It's informed by the way desire maps onto something a lot of people don't know about Mormons is that if you are in between a certain awkward age, there's like family wards, which is like where you just go to church on Sunday. And then there's singles wards where like they have you go to church with people like between like 18 to like 30 something, and you just go to church with other people who aren't married. And those are the only people you get to see at church all the time, because they are just trying to have you have as much interaction as possible with people who aren't married yet. Like, it is so focused on marriage. But like, God forbid you have sex with one of those people before you get married. Mormon culture is so focused on this timeline. So yeah, you're 100 years old, but you still can't fuck. Like, that is, it's so Mormon. It's so Mormon, and it's so reactionary to the concept of like the Lestat vampire. So it's fascinating to me.
Yeah, I
That's
think there's so many differences in like the things that I think Anne Rice seems to have been exploring compared to like the things that kind of just like come out about Stephanie Meyer and like what like this I feel like this is maybe a really minimizing way to talk about like a series of novels by a woman, but I feel like a lot of the things that happen in the final resolution of Twilight happen because Stephanie Meyer thinks they're nice. She thinks it's nice for Bella and Edward to have a big marriage, like the big wedding. She thinks it's nice that they get to have a baby before Bella becomes immortal. Like I feel like a lot of it kind of comes across as like this was what I wanted because I wanted these characters to be happy because I liked them, which is fine. That's a fine way to write a story. But I do think it's definitely very different things than a lot of other people want to explore with vampires.
And we're not talking about it like an obscure fan fiction. We're talking about something that then drew so many other people. Like, so many people saw their desires resonated in it. So many people saw something resonate in it. And I think that is significant to talk about. There is a queer prom in my area that is Twilight themed right now. Like, there is something resonant in this story. And I think that's why it's important to, or, you know, I think it does, Twilight like discourse does get shat on, like, and Twilight gets shat on, and it's like, it's important to talk about the racism. It's important to talk about like all of these things because it is such a resonant story. That's how I feel as, you know, a mixed person, as an ex-Mormon. I think it is important to talk about like all of these nuances and understand, like, when I tell you I read these motherfuckers cover to cover to cover. Even the parts my mom marked out with Post-its that said, do not read the part in Breaking Dawn, do not read the honeymoon. Those are bookmarks, baby.
Yeah, I think I mentioned that in an earlier part of the video too, where I was saying like I think a lot of people who have like hate in their heart for Twilight, I think that they have good justified reasons for feeling that way, and it's fine. And I'm never going to be like, you need to dislike it and you don't like it because it's by a woman.
No.
But also like people coming back to this thing and kind of like thinking of it as kind of like a guilty pleasure and like, oh, this is kind of fun to revisit. This is, you know, there's like a, I read an article that described the first movie as camp and was saying that like the later movies lose the camp factor like progressively as it goes on. And I think yeah, if you are approaching something as camp, it is also easier to be like, here are the ways where this is doing bad things that like if and I think that there's also a huge difference between like people doing a queer Twilight prom compared to like still supporting J.K. Rowling, because I feel like
Yeah,
there's no way Stephanie Meyer is getting any money from a queer Twilight prom.
exactly. Yeah. And people have not done the same work to do things like, I think, to deconstruct Harry Potter, with its theme parks and its merch and its butterbeer popcorn at Safeway and its new TV show, the way it's like, no, we're done with Twilight.
Yeah.
It's done. We're good. I cannot remember the name of the gender swapped green apple book right now.
Life and Death.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Yep.
Really?
I have not read that one, but I remember everyone was over Twilight by the time that came out.
And when I tell you I read The Pirated Midnight Sun, printed out in a binder 3-ring, when I tell you I read it.
I remember spending a lot of time on her author website, and I remember she would post like playlists for all of the books, and they all had like Muse on them. Which I always think is funny because one of the first things that people who didn't really ever get into Twilight tell me is they're like, I love the supermassive black hole vampire baseball scene. And I'm like, the thing that's wildest about that is that that scene, the best scene in all of Twilight, isn't even from the director having like a truly inspired idea, but from the director knowing she needed to put a fucking Muse song in that movie.
I can see that woman really liking Muse. That makes a lot of sense. This feels like a series written while daydreaming to Muse. Well, I think my third thing, I don't know if we're going to make it to all 5 between the 2 of us, but I think my third thing I had on my list of like the Mormonness of Twilight was the emphasis on eternal families. That is a phrase used in Mormonism constantly. We sing songs about it as little baby children. If you've ever seen a big, beautiful Mormon temple, it looks like Cinderella's castle. That's what we're doing in there. That's our little cult rituals. You can look them up on YouTube. It's all eternal families. It's all so that in Mormon heaven, we can all hang out together, not with you dirty little non-Mormons. We can all be beautiful white Mormons all together. Unlike you fucking plebes. And so you see this like image of the Cullens who don't eat, who don't shit, who don't sleep, in their perfect white house where they have to like remember how to accommodate a human. And they're the same perfect age. They never get sick. And it is so reminiscent of like all of the imagery of like the perfect family. This is something I texted you about, I think, where I said that there's this like, again, this is Mormon pop culture. You're going to have trouble if you ever wanted to look it up. But there's this Mormon pop culture idea that because Jesus died at 33 years old, when Mormons get resurrected and go to Mormon heaven, everybody's going to be 33 years old, like this beautiful, really like strong and intelligent age. Even like people who died very young or people who died very old, everybody's going to be 33. And that is like not necessarily a vampire fantasy, but it's a little close of like this eternal youth. So you see, like, yeah, Edward and his dad being the same age that feels so weird to everybody else is not weird to Mormons. That's a very normal idea that you're raised with and conditioned to be super, super cool with. Yeah, so I think that strikes as an extremely Mormon concept. And I think it explains the Renesmee imprinting.
Yeah, say more about that. I think we need to try to explain that as much as possible for people because I've explained what happens, but like I cannot explain why she did that.
What's hard to understand about the Renesmee imprinting? The most clear thing that's ever happened in cinema. I think the eternal families, and the more you understand about Mormonism, the clearer the Renesmee imprinting gets. If you understand the concept of like predestination, the idea that like, okay, what happens to you on Earth is already decided before you get here, right? So the idea, you know, people make fun of the idea of like Edward's sperm and Bella's egg. Was Jacob already attracted to that? It's like, no, but the soul's inside. Like, yeah, there's a concept in like Mormonism that it's like, okay, when you're in like pre-heaven, everything's already sorted out for you and you've already met everybody. And it's like, yeah, temporally in timeline, on an eternal timeline, nobody really gives a fuck on where you lay on the temporal timeline because it's all eternal anyway, and everybody's already all picked out for you. So what does 18 years really matter? It doesn't matter because you're the same age as your dad, and your daughter's the same age as you, and it all shakes out in eternity, and you're all picked out for each other ahead of time. You have so little consent and control over the situation to start with. You're already so conditioned to be cool with it that it doesn't really flag to you as really dog shit. It is like picked out ahead of time. You're gonna go like meet each other, say goodbye before you forget all of this. And like, this is your husband, this is your wife. You're gonna meet each other down there, but it's gonna be a while. Say goodbye till you go see each other again. Bye. Okay, you'll see each other in like 30 years or whatever. So like, yeah, it's true love. It's not creepy that this is not the beliefs of Kaia Ball of the internet. Please don't clip this.
You're trying to make it look like I said I think Poolsville sucks.
You can see my shoulders. I dress like this so I don't look Mormon. So like if it gets clipped, you can see my tits.
I think you were right about us not quite getting, because I said two of mine together, and then the last one that I have is a very deeply silly one. So I
Okay.
think this would be number four for most Mormon things about Twilight, and it is Bella always saying "Holy Crow." I felt like that's very Mormon.
I ate Tom Kha soup for either the first time or the first time in a long time. Like this was like last week, and I went, "Oh, gosh, jolly geez, Williker. I am I am an adult. I have a car. I have a bank account." And my friend went, "Oh, you pulling out the gosh Williker? You pulling out the gee whiz? Watch out." I was so upset. I've been thinking about that for days. I've been allowed to say fuck as an adult for like a decade. And I so went, "Oh, gee Willikers," when I had a good taste of soup. So yeah, Holy Crow is real if that's what you want to know. I still say my goodness when I'm surprised. I'll stub my toe and go, "Oh my goodness."
Oh, and you could pick whatever level of severity if you want to pick us a number five for our top five most Mormon thing.
This is like, it's kind of basic. It's just us versus them, where just the constant mentality of like, we need to be. Bella being a dick to her friends is very Mormon, genuinely. You get taught like you need to like give up all your friends to be Mormon and to like get into Mormon heaven. And if they're not cool with you being Mormon, which no one has an issue with, but that's also like part of that evangelical like victim mentality, right? But like Bella is such a dick to like Anna Kendrick, and like for no reason. And it's like that wedding. It's like, I guess I'll have to say goodbye to all my friends forever. Like a lot of people tell stories about going to like the Mormon weddings of their friends and having to like sit outside because you can't go to Mormon temples. Like there's this us versus them mentality with even the people you're closest to, let alone the like you have like indigenous folk who are like, we there's not like fully a reason for us to have beef with you yet until you're like doing horrible like war crimes, the fuck. And then the whole like there's so many instances of just unnecessary conflict, of posturing, of just creating tension because you have this like made up moral high ground. And that's like a huge theme of the book, and it's not really presented as a character flaw.
Yeah,
It's just good.
I have never thought about like, because I mean I did think about Bella being like, she's a terrible friend. Her friends are like actually pretty good to her. Like they keep trying with her. They're nice. I never thought about that as like an allegory for conversion, but that makes so much sense as soon as you said that, because that is, as you said, like the evangelical thing of like you need to God bother all of your friends so that when they seem vaguely annoyed by that, you're being oppressed for being a Christian.
Harley's like reluctance to get on board, he's not kind of like, it's kind of on him. It's like my dad's being a dick for not getting that I found Jesus.
And he does eventually like he gives his blessing for the wedding and gives her away.
Yeah. Yeah. Instead of being like, I respect you for having a difference of belief for me. Like there's not like a middle ground. It's like everybody needs to get on board with the Cullens, which are the coolest, best thing that exists.
I
Which
think
is
that
like the ultimate teenage fantasy, right? Is like I found
yeah.
these new cool people and everybody sees how cool and awesome they are, including my dad.
I think I know that these were in a different order when I sent them, but I think if we could actually jump into, in your opinion, is Carlisle Cullen Joseph Smith? Because I think that's a question I've been looking forward to getting your answer to.
Okay, here's the deal. I don't think he is like, yes, right there, Joseph Smith. I think there's like a temptation for people who aren't intimately familiar with Mormonism, but like know the dregs. And I probably do this with like 1,000 subjects, to be like, the twink one is Joseph Smith and the bear one is Brigham Young. I think that's very tempting. We all love it, okay? But however, I think a lot of like Utah-esque Mormons look the same. I think there's a very Mormon mold. And I think that Mormon mold is a very up and down kind of way. And that Mormon mold isn't too far off from that 1800s motherfucker. So like yes and no. And I know that's shitty, but it's like, it's not like, I don't think that Stephanie Myer was really like having an like Freudian moment of like this patriarch of the Mormon church. The patriarchy of the religion she was part of her entire life probably played a role into this very gender heavy book where she was writing the patriarch of the family who was the doctor, which is this patriarchal role. Like she was writing the ultimate patriarch and gave him a ton of the like really patriarchal. I mean, like patriarch is like a term used in Mormonism constantly. Before you leave home, you get a patriarchal blessing. I got one. And I was very excited because mine didn't mention men. Most of them are very gendered. Mine didn't mention having a husband, and I was very relieved by that for some reason when I got mine. Anyway, but you get a patriarchal blessing when you leave home by a patriarch. That's his name. Very, very, yeah. So my answer is no with an asterisk.
That makes sense to me. When you say like a patriarch, is that like a position in the church, like a
Guy.
clergyman, or like just a guy who has a family?
Yeah, so the church structure is very rigid. It's not volunteer, you get appointed. Like somebody will like come up to you and be like, hey, we want to have a meeting with you. And they pull you in and they're like, we prayed about it and Jesus told us that you should be a bishop. I'm heavily paraphrasing. I'm sorry, current Mormons and ex-Mormons who care more to be accurate about this. But they're like, we prayed about it and Jesus told us that you should be the current bishop. And then you help pray about it and that's how you get a bishopric. A bishopric leads a ward. So you think about like, that's the local level. And then you get like all the other people on top of it. A stake is bigger than a ward and you get stake president. And then there's a patriarch at a stake. It's very hierarchical and almost like it's modeled after like the American business, or some say that the American business and Mormonism are inexplicably, intertwined, whatever. But it's very appointment based. It's very rigid. It's based on like handbooks. It's based on severance is really making me take a step back and like reflect on Mormonism. And so when you talk about a patriarch, it's a guy who was appointed. Somebody took him aside and said, like, okay, we prayed on it and think you should be a patriarch and you have these duties to do for this group of people, which might cover like 7 to 8 towns, depending on population density. You're on like chapter 11 of a curriculum in Chicago, and you go visit your family in California for a weekend and you go to church. They'll be studying chapter 12 that week. And you can go home to Chicago and they'll be studying chapter 13. Like you won't miss church because Mormon churches stay on a schedule. It's the same handbook. It's the same lessons. And I thought that's what church was for everybody else. Like Mormon churches are a business structure.
I was going to ask if there's anything that you think that them doing high school over and over again is paralleling.
Oh, fascinating. Oh, that's so good. Mormons have seminary, so that's like the class high schoolers do in the mornings. In Utah, it's like part of their daily classes, but the rest of the country, and I think some places around the world, don't quote me on that, do it in the mornings. So like ours was at like 5 a.m., so it was before 0 hour or something, maybe 5:30. But that's just like a Bible class in the morning. So you just cycle through like New Testament, Old Testament, Book of Mormon, Pearl of Great Price, Mormon scriptures. So you cycle through that. So you spend 4 years of high school doing like an extra Bible study class. Besides that, yeah, you do spend like your Mormon life doing like relatively intense Bible study. When Twilight was coming out, Mormon church was still 3 hours. They've cut that down. But it used to be 3 hours every week, and then you would have other stuff during the week. So like a couple more hours during the week, and then every like member of the family would have their own activities as well. So like the men would have a couple hours, the women would have a couple hours, every kid would have a couple hours because again it's gendered. So like it was very easy to spend like 10, 12, 15 hours a week at church, depending on how many kids you had. So there is that concept of like you are always engaging with scripture, you're always engaging with church. Besides that, it's a really good question. How much do you know about the planets?
Not
Know about the planets?
is heaven a planet for Mormons? Is that a thing? Because if it is, that might be.
Let me
I know
take a
vaguely.
second before we get into the planet. I won't hear the word that's in the video, but now this is just for you. This might just be fun for you. I'm making sure I'm grounded before I go into the planet thing, because the planet thing makes me lose my mind. Okay, we talked a little bit. You start. I'm trying to decide where to start. This is the Mormon planet thing is crazy. Okay. Once upon a time, there was a little guy. We're going to call him God. He came from a planet. That planet was called Kolob, right? You have not heard of the planet thing.
No.
We're on a ride today. Okay. God came from a planet called Kolob, rocking and rolling. And he was like, time for me to cook up my own planet. And so God and his wife, who shall not be named, they cooked up a bajillion spirit children. So remember that whole thing with Renesmee? Spirit child, right? Jacob, spirit child. Edward, Bella, all the Cullens, spirit children. Okay. Cooking up all the spirit children. This is also why Edward's damned, because he doesn't get to do the rest of this story, because he's a spirit child, never got to go through the rest of it. Kolob. There's a whole other like war where they like couldn't decide what to do, and Jesus was like part of the spirit war, and then Satan was part of the spirit war, and Satan lost. That's a whole other thing. The point is, there's like this pipeline. The spirit children got to go to Earth, and they either become Mormon or don't. It's more complicated than that, but for our purposes, we're going to simplify it. You either become Mormon and you're a very, very good Mormon, or you don't. Sucks for you if you don't become Mormon. I know what you're thinking. I thought Mormonism was invented in the last 150 years. Okay, sucks for you. There's more to this, but so there's 3 heavens you can go to. You can stay on Earth. Sucks for you. Earth sucks. There's another heaven. We don't talk about this one. You don't want to go there. And there's the last heaven. This one's the best. This is Mormon heaven. That's where you get to hang out with the Cullens. They don't have.
You're 30.
Where you're 33 forever. You don't have to eat. You don't have to sleep. You get to hang out with your family and your loved ones and your wife and your kids and your grandparents and their kids. Awesome forever. It's because you lived a perfect, wonderful Mormon life. And remember how God had a planet? He earned that because he made it to his top heaven. Because, plot twist, he used to be a spirit children and had to do this whole thing.
But then where did he come from?
He came from somebody else doing it. It was a cycle. It's an MLM. It's all an MLM.
So fascinating.
Somebody
Also,
else-
like, I already understood, I thought what you meant about, like, oh, Mormons make really good science fiction authors, but, like, as soon as you hit me with God came from a planet, I was like, oh my God.
This is what I'm telling you. The lore is deep. Because there's also, like, this whole thing. There's so much details to this. I'm trying to, like, blast through so this doesn't take half an hour. There's, like, so many details to this. I'm trying to, like, pick out pertinent things. So, like, when I talked about the temples, part of what we do in the temples is if it's like, too bad, so sad, you died before you had the joy of becoming Mormon, it's like, okay, well, you're probably like locked up in some horrible, horrible screaming hell called spirit prison. So let's go ahead and jailbreak you, bestie. So that's what we do in the temples is children like go and I'm sorry, Mormons, you're probably like hating this. Children like go and get like baptized it's called baptisms for the dead. And they like go and do rituals and stuff. And then adults go and do rituals and stuff. And that means you can go from spirit prison and then you can go to spirit paradise so that you can make it to third heaven. Yay. And you can go live with the Collins. So you don't have to live on icky Earth.
It's so much. I feel like I feel like I've tracked with what you've told me, but I can tell how much you're holding back.
I did not go too far because it's so much information.
But
There's so
the thing you said about like Edward is damned because he can't continue in the MLM cycle. So that I think ties us into like the natalism of all of this, right?
good job making a segue. Incredible.
So yeah, the video, most of what I talk about like the abstinence of it all, and then the anti-choice messaging in the last book being really, really heavy-handed. And I just wanted, first of all, just like in general, I was just gonna ask to hear about like what your perspective is on that, but also to talk about the way that in the book she frames it so that Bella is like fighting against the rest of the Cullens so that she gets to have like this moral superiority over like not wanting to kill her baby. Because I feel like that's maybe the one place where the Cullens as Mormons metaphor fails. Because everybody but Rosalie is saying fetus, and Rosalie keeps being like, "It's just a baby. Just say the word baby."
Yeah, it's very strange that flip, right? Because yeah, I'm I almost want to give you the chance to cut out the whole explanation Mormon heaven, but it actually does work. Is like you have a very important job to bring more potential planet owners into this world, right? You have a very important job to bring people into this world so they have the chance to be Mormons. That is a core part of who you are. Especially as a woman, right? Especially as someone who can bear children. That is like most of who you are. People who can't bear children experience pretty rough mental health issues. They experience some stigmatization. It's gotten somewhat better, but only if they choose to adopt a lot of the time. The Mormon adoption industry is predatory and rife with issues. People choosing to adopt because they have a hole in their heart left by infertility issues is rife, and then the subsequent issues with that. Natalism is saying the default. It feels like still an understatement. It is what you. It's everything. It's what you are. It's so yeah. It is interesting to have the flip of like because Stephanie Myer isn't afraid to make the indigenous people and Bella Swan's family the villains. It's interesting to make the Cullens be like, hey, actually, this is the bad idea. Because if they are going to be the Mormon allegory, Mormons love babies. Mormons are all over babies. This is not a rare Mormon story at all. I know people who can beat out the story by a mile. I knew a family in my ward who had 10 children. The first 9 were sons. The last one was a daughter because the mother really wanted a daughter and kept having prophetic visions that she was going to have a daughter. And one of the ultrasounds for, I think, kid 4 erroneously indicated that it was going to be a kid that was going to be assigned female at birth, and it wasn't. And that kids like 4 through 9 were just like nothing because they weren't girls. Like kids, if they aren't what they're supposed to be, just like in Mormonism, it's just like you need to be the child I'm supposed to be having. If you're adopted and you're not like showing up as the Mormon you're supposed to be, then you're not like the child that's supposed to be there. It's rough. It's rough. So it's very interesting. That arc, the Renesmee arc is so fascinating. So like as a Mormon reader, as a non-Mormon reader, as like it's a fascinating arc. And I really wonder if even she could really sit down and explain like what was going through her brain. Because there's so many angles to it.
I think that's kind of a common theme with a lot of things in Twilight, but I agree that the Renesmee one is the one that I would be most interested to try to hear her answers about.
Yeah.
But I feel like, I mean, I think she said it herself that a lot of it is mostly subconscious. I think that's one of the clips that ContraPoints uses a lot is Stephanie saying it was subconscious and written in 3 months.
the books, she's very open that the books originated from a dream. And that's part of, like, at some points you start to dissect art too much and it starts to just like dissolve in your hands. Like, there's only so much you can do.
Right, right. And I think I also made this joke in the video where I was like, I am overanalyzing this, but also that's literally what I'm here to do, is to overanalyze this. Okay, we've been here at least as long as any of the Twilight movies by now, especially the one that I was decrying for being so ridiculously poorly paced. But let me wrap up here. While no one in the narrative exerts pressure on Bella to make her ultimate choice in the book or the movie, the way the narrative itself works is what I mean when I say that it's a piece of pro-forced birth propaganda. And that's because it's pro-forced birth, because I do not say pro-life, right? Nobody is forcing her to give birth. Instead, it is framed as though the idea of an abortion is completely unthinkable to Bella, despite no groundwork being laid to set up Bella as someone who wanted children. It's unthinkable that Bella would value her own life over the fetus's. And I don't ever love or enjoy watching Edward yell at Bella, but I do think in Breaking Dawn Part 1, there is actually a very interesting scene to watch play out where that happens. Bella is insistent on keeping the fetus inside of her, planning to die in childbirth and have Carlisle turn her into a vampire. She is at peace with the idea of the vampire transformation not working, though. She tells Edward that he will at least still have a part of her even if she dies, and he asks her if she genuinely believes that he could love that baby knowing that it had killed her. Edward sees the so-called error of his ways, I guess, eventually coming to share Bella's devotion to the fetus. But I think the birth scene plays out in a way that is so fascinating when you're watching this as a gender horror movie. The fetus breaks Bella's spine, and then once they have her up on a table in Carlisle's workspace, and Carlisle's out of town. He's trying to go get more blood for Bella, so he's not there. It's just Edward and Jacob and Rosalie and Alice. Rosalie grabs a scalpel and straight up just slices into Bella, even as Edward protests that the morphine hasn't been given time to spread. Bella, though, is still aligned with Rosalie at this point, and she's agreeing with her, as Rosalie is protesting that the baby is suffocating inside of Bella and needs to be cut out. And then Rosalie gets distracted by that juicy special best girl blood and has to be removed from the situation. She will come back later to steal the baby, but Edward and Bella have to be given a moment to fawn over it in privacy. Other than that, Jacob is there, and he doesn't imprint on the baby yet at this point, because I guess it has to be eye contact, and I guess the newborn makes eye contact with him because she's very advanced. Also, this whole pregnancy happened in 28 days. Have I mentioned that? Here's the thing. Bella was always planning on turning into a vampire at the last moment after giving birth, and was just hoping that it would work, even though Carlisle told her that it may not if she were too far gone. But rather than biting her and trying to turn her into a vampire as soon as the baby is born, there is time taken for Bella to lay there, gaunt and emaciated from the pregnancy, but beautiful in the way martyrs are even while they're suffering, peacefully watching and seeing what she did all that suffering for before she dies. And Edward's focus shifts so completely onto Renesmee that Bella has nothing to do but die prettily, proud of herself for having achieved this goal of bringing an Edward baby into the world. Rosalie comes back in to take the baby away at some point in all of this, and because it's Twilight, and because there was always going to be a happy ending, Bella does end up turning into a vampire. And they put her in a fancy designer dress while she's laying there mostly dead, even though when she was a human, she usually would protest that fancy stuff that Alice would put her in. She's significantly more feminized in her costuming as a vampire, both in the movie and in the book. I think in the movie, I guess it would be the only way that they would think that they could have gotten across the vampirism, making Kristen Stewart more beautiful or whatever, but it is a feature of the book because, again, I think it tells us some things about the author's worldview.
I'm trying to think, with the natalism, I might just like take a second of to reflect for a second. Yeah, I don't know. It's so there's something striking about the depiction of violence with Renesmee, right? And this is not freshly trod ground, but there's something so striking about it. While that it almost after a book where it's like, don't do this, the characters that have been voices of reason to Bella, that have been someone Bella's like, this point of view character has been like really trusting in, or like, don't do this thing, and then it's so painful and it's so awful. yeah, there's something so punishing about the Renesmee arc. Yeah, that's something I'm kind of reflecting with and sitting with. Is there something so punishing about it without redemption? There's something so punishing about it without redemption, like without apology.
And also, sometimes people will say that this narrative actually does work as an abortion metaphor, but ultimately, because it is about choice, it is pro-choice. And isn't the choice to opt into carrying a risky pregnancy just as brave and important as the choice to not? And my answer to that is that while I am pro choice, I am not obligated to think that all choices are smart ones. I don't think that killing yourself and leaving behind your family for the sake of a hypothetical baby who might grow up to be very depressed and wish they weren't born, especially if they, grew up in the circle of loss that would ensue from their mother dying in childbirth, on account of people who die in childbirth actually don't get to come back and watch the baby speedrun growing up. And my other answer to that is that just because Stephenie Meyer didn't have her characters coerce Bella into having children does not mean that Stephenie Meyer didn't decide that the most beautiful, optimal way for Bella's story to conclude would be that the loss of her humanity was not a conscious choice she made and opted into, but that it still needed to be framed as a sacrifice. Even though Twilight very simply could have just been a story about a girl getting what she wanted.
That there it is. Okay. Because you don't get to go to third Mormon heaven unless you fulfill your job. You have to be everything good and right to get the rewards. And that means being a mom. It's not enough to want, it's not enough to have desire, it's not enough to get the boy. You need to do your freaking job and nut up and shut up and be the good little girl and suffer and make it through. Yeah, shit. Ew.
Really nasty. By introducing the baby out of nowhere as a new thing for Bella to want, and a thing for her to want more than her stated goals, Stephenie just loses me. And then especially by showing a woman dying happily, gleeful for the chance at giving birth to a monster baby, and by having the narrative reward her for that with uncomplicated beauty and relative ease, disregarding the events of the second installation of the last movie. But still, nothing even actually really happens. Anyway, it's just like I was literally like, I was looking at what I have so far for the video and I was like, I could keep going, and also I don't want to keep thinking about Twilight full time for another week. Like I would,
No.
I would like to put this down for a little bit.
Dawn, especially Breaking Dawn.
The worst one to focus on. Thank you so much. This was amazing. Like I think I'm going to be using like most of this call. I had a blast and I feel like you gave us so much very helpful context for all of this. I'm really excited.
I'm so glad. This is so fun. So nice to talk to you.
One last thought here. I'm also always struck by the final scene in the series. When everything is over with and they're safe after the big fake-out confrontation with the Volturi, and Bella shows Edward this new skill that she's learned. Because, and this hasn't really mattered so far, so I haven't mentioned it, but it turns out that the only mind that Edward Cullen cannot read is Bella's, and it's because she has a shield that she's able to also use to protect other people from vampire powers once she's a vampire. Bella learned how to move the shield somewhere else, like outside of her head in the final book. And so the final moments of the series are about their happily ever after, and that being Bella allowing Edward to read her mind. And also for context, it regularly bothers Edward throughout the series that he's unable to read her mind. He complains about it pretty frequently, and then he responds very positively to this. Yet another thing that she learns how to do and then is very happy to surrender to him, the privacy of even the inside of her mind. And that's the happiest ending imaginable, subsumed completely into her role as Edward's wife, Renesmee's mother, beautifully and sexually successful vampire Bella Cullen. She shows him her memories of their first night having sex when she became a vampire, and then he distracts her by kissing her, like, on the neck about it, and then he growls in frustration when that interrupts her focus, and then he asks him to show her again, and she reminds her they have plenty of time about it, a little bit of dialogue, like, forever, we're vampires, we're in love. And the point of it is that it's a small but perfect piece of their happily ever after, or whatever, right? it's just so interesting to me. I feel like I have said those words so many times in this video, but Twilight is so interesting. I mean, at least in the case of Bella letting Edward read her mind, it's something that she has control over and not just a switch that gets flipped off when she becomes a vampire. And I know the argument could be made, and probably will be made, that it's just supposed to be romantic. Bella wants him to be able to read her mind when she's doing this. It's fine. I've just always been put off in the moments when he acted frustrated about not being able to read her mind, because I expected the whole deal of Midnight Sun to be that half of why she was so appealing to him was because he finally got to be around someone quiet. And I didn't read much of Midnight Sun, but I did get through enough to feel like he seemed very entitled to the contents of her mind, and that really sours me on these as the final moments of the book. But that was a Breaking Dawn Part 2 complaint, and the rest of these were almost all Breaking Dawn Part 1 complaints. I think I had better wrap it up here just for the sake of not spending another entire week thinking about this terrible book full time. You can find my sources linked in the description below. You can also find my Patreon, where Patreon supporters got a few different draft versions of this video a little bit early. Thank you so much to my Patreon supporters. Patreon is a fantastic way to help support me financially. In addition to getting drafts of longer videos like this sometimes as I work on them, they also get a couple of other videos and bonus content every month. Thank you so much to everybody who does support me on the Patreon. You can see a few of those names listed on the screen right now. And if you are a video enjoyer and above tier and you'd like your name listed on the video, you can just comment on a post over on Patreon to let me know, and I will make sure we get you added. Thanks so much to everybody who has supported me via the Patreon, via sending me a one-off donation on Ko-fi, super chats during my live streams, super thanks in my comment section. All of that makes such a huge difference in my day-to-day life, and I am so grateful for it. I'm also grateful for how long you spent listening to me talk about Twilight. I'm also very grateful to the sponsor of today's video, Valessa, and to all of you for spending hours thinking about Twilight with me. It's fun. Love you. I'll be back soon. Bye. Are you the world's most dangerous predator? So little babe.